Imagine standing in the middle of a storm, not just any storm, but the kind that shakes the very ground beneath you, the kind that tests every ounce of your willpower. Now imagine feeling completely unshaken, rooted in a calm so deep it defies the chaos around you. That's the power of Stoicism, a philosophy forged in the fires of adversity and honed by some of history's greatest minds. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled an empire while facing relentless challenges, once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Those words aren't just ancient wisdom, they're a blueprint for building unyielding resilience in a world that never stops testing us. Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions or gritting your teeth through life's hardships. It's about cultivating a mindset that turns obstacles into opportunities, fear into fuel, and uncertainty into a catalyst for growth. Think about the last time you felt overwhelmed. Maybe it was a setback at work, a personal loss, or just the weight of everyday stress. What if you had a toolkit of practices tested by time to help you navigate those moments with clarity and purpose? That's exactly what we're diving into today. 48 Stoic practices designed to fortify your inner strength and sharpen your ability to take assertive, deliberate action. These aren't abstract theories, they're actionable strategies distilled from the teachings of Stoic philosophers like Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius himself. From the moment you wake up to the way you respond to criticism, from managing fear to embracing discomfort, these practices are about reclaiming control not over the world but over your own mind. Whether you're facing a high-pressure decision, a personal crisis, or just the ordinary chaos of modern life, Stoicism offers a path to stand firm, act decisively, and live with intention. This video isn't just a lesson, it's an invitation to transform the way you meet challenges, one practice at a time. So let's begin this journey together, not as passive observers, but as students of a philosophy that has shaped warriors, leaders, and thinkers for centuries. The storm around you doesn't have to dictate your calm because true strength starts within. The first, and perhaps most transformative Stoic practice begins with a simple yet radical idea: separate what's within your power from what isn't. This is what Epictetus called the Dichotomy of Control, and it's the foundation of Stoic resilience. Picture this: you're stuck in traffic, late for an important meeting. Your hands grip the wheel, frustration boiling over as you watch the clock tick. But here's the reality: the traffic jam, that's outside your control. Your reaction, that's entirely yours to command. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of history's most influential philosophers, put it bluntly: some things are up to us and some are not. The moment you internalize this distinction, you reclaim a superpower, the ability to channel your energy where it actually matters. Think about your own life for a second. How much mental space do you waste trying to manage things you can't change? A colleague's attitude, the weather, a cancelled flight. Now imagine redirecting that effort toward what you can influence: your preparation, your mindset, your next move. Take workplace stress as an example. You can't control your boss's demands or the company's deadlines, but you can control how you organize your tasks, the boundaries you set, and even the way you interpret pressure. The Stoics weren't advocating passivity, they were teaching strategic focus. When you stop fighting unwinnable battles, you free up reserves of energy for the ones that count. So here's a challenge. For the next 24 hours, catch yourself every time you react to something outside your control. Notice how often you tense up over a comment you can't take back or a situation you didn't create. Then pause, ask, is this mine to fix? If not, let it pass like clouds in the sky. If it is, act decisively without complaint. This isn't about giving up, it's about growing up. Because the real measure of strength isn't how much you try to control the world, it's how wisely you govern yourself. Now let's explore one of the most powerful yet counterintuitive Stoic tools, negative visualization. At first glance, it might sound pessimistic, deliberately imagining the worst that could happen. But this practice, known as premeditatio malorum in Latin, was championed by Seneca as a way to disarm fear and build unshakable resilience. Here's how it works. Instead of avoiding thoughts of failure, loss, or hardship, you confront them head-on, not to dwell in anxiety, but to strip them of their power. Picture losing your job, a relationship ending, or even a health scare. By mentally rehearsing these scenarios, you do something profound. You expose the illusion that your peace depends on everything going right. Seneca, who faced exile, political betrayal, and even his own eventual execution, wrote, "He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand." Think of it like a fire drill. When you've walked through the steps of an emergency in advance, panic doesn't paralyze you. You act. The same applies to life's uncertainties. A business owner might visualize their biggest client leaving, not to invite disaster, but to prepare contingency plans and realize they'd still adapt. A parent might imagine their child struggling, not to invite suffering, but to clarify how they'd respond with patience and love. This practice isn't about manifesting doom, it's about vaccinating your mind against helplessness. Try this today. Set aside 2 minutes to mentally walk through a challenge you fear. Maybe it's a difficult conversation, a financial setback, or a missed opportunity. See it unfold in your mind, then picture yourself responding with stoic calm. What principles would guide you? What resources would you rely on? Notice how the worst-case scenario loses its fangs when you've already faced it in your mind. The Stoics weren't preparing for life to fall apart. They were ensuring that, no matter what happened, they wouldn't. Because when you've already stood in the storm by choice, you'll never be knocked over by surprise. This exercise reveals a liberating truth. Most of what we fear lies in the shadows of our avoidance. Shine a light on it, and you'll find something unexpected, not terror, but capability. Seneca put it best, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. By rehearsing adversity, you're not inviting it in. You're building a mind so fortified that even life's hardest blows feel like challenges you've trained for. And that's the heart of Stoic strength, not avoiding the fall, but knowing you can rise every time. Now let's turn to one of the most liberating Stoic practices, Amor Fati, the love of fate. This isn't just passive acceptance, it's an active embrace of everything life throws at you, the good and the bad. Friedrich Nietzsche, who borrowed this idea from the Stoics, called it the ultimate formula for human greatness. My formula for greatness is Amor Fati, to want nothing to be different, not in the future, not in the past, not for all eternity. But long before Nietzsche, Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's the heart of this practice, seeing every obstacle, every setback, even every heartbreak as fuel for growth. Consider the story of Musonius Rufus, the Stoic philosopher exiled to a barren island by Emperor Nero. Instead of crumbling in self-pity, he treated exile as an opportunity. He planted gardens, taught philosophy to the locals, and even declared the harsh environment made him stronger. When Nero's men mocked him, asking how he could endure such conditions, he replied, "Do you think exile is a hardship? The whole world is my home." That's Amor Fati in action, not just tolerating fate, but loving it for the lessons it brings. Here's the question to ask yourself. What if your current struggles aren't barriers, but the very path to becoming who you're meant to be? Maybe that job rejection steered you toward a better fit. Maybe that illness taught you resilience you never knew you had. The Stoics didn't see fate as something to resent. They saw it as a collaborator. Imagine carrying that mindset into your own. Challenges the traffic jam that gives you time to reflect, the criticism that sharpens your skills, the failure that redirects you to something greater. This isn't about pretending hardship doesn't hurt. It's about recognizing that pain and progress often share the same space. When you stop fighting reality and start working with it, you unlock a peculiar kind of freedom. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire plagued by war and plague, yet he wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together." That's the secret. Love your fate, not because it's always pleasant, but because it's yours, and within it lies every opportunity you'll ever need to grow. Most of us start our days on autopilot, scrolling through notifications, rushing through routines, reacting to whatever the world throws at us. But the Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius, had a radically different approach. His personal writings, now known as meditations, weren't meant for publication. They were his morning ritual, a way to align his mind before stepping into the chaos of ruling an empire. Picture this: before dawn, with a lamp flickering in the quiet, he'd write reminders to himself, not lofty ideals, but gritty, practical truths. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. That's not pessimism, it's preparation. By naming potential challenges upfront, he stripped them of their power to surprise or derail him. Your morning reflection doesn't need to be elaborate. It's about carving out just 5 minutes before your phone buzzes, before the day's demands take over, to ask 2 Stoic questions. What's one challenge I'll likely face today? And how will I meet it with integrity? Maybe it's a tense meeting where emotions could flare. Instead of dreading it, jot down how you'll respond if someone interrupts you. Pause. Listen, reply with clarity, not heat, or perhaps it's a task you've been avoiding. Write the first step you'll take, no matter how small. This practice isn't about predicting every problem, it's about rehearsing your agency. Marcus didn't just note obstacles, he mapped his mindset. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Here's how to make it actionable today. Grab a notebook or even a scrap of paper and divide it into 2 columns. On the left, write one difficulty you anticipate, a deadline, a conversation, even your own procrastination. On the right, write your Stoic response. For example, if my coworker criticizes my idea, I'll listen first, then clarify my perspective without defensiveness. The magic isn't in the words, it's in the mental rehearsal. You're not just planning your day, you're programming your reflexes. When the moment arrives, you won't be hijacked by emotion. You'll have already walked through the fire in your mind. This ritual does something profound. It shifts you from passive reactor to active architect of your day. The Stoics knew that mornings set the tone. Seneca wrote, "Every new day is a new life." Those quiet moments of reflection are where you decide whether you'll be carried by the current or steer your own ship. So tomorrow, before you check the weather or your inbox, ask yourself, what's one thing that could test my calm today, and how will I rise above it? The answer might just be the anchor that keeps you steady when the winds pick up. The sun has set, the day's chaos has quieted, and now comes one of the most transformative Stoic rituals, the evening review. Seneca, the philosopher who advised emperors and navigated political storms, called this practice his daily reckoning. He'd sit in the candlelight, scroll in hand, and ask himself 2 piercing questions. What wounds did I inflict today? And where did I fall short of my own standards? But here's the crucial distinction. This wasn't an exercise in self-flagellation. The Stoics didn't believe in dwelling on mistakes with guilt. They believed in learning from them with clarity. Think of it like a surgeon washing their instruments after an operation, not to dwell on what went wrong, but to ensure they're ready for the next challenge. Picture your own day for a moment. Maybe you snapped at a loved one during a stressful moment, or perhaps you procrastinated on a task that mattered. The evening review isn't about berating yourself for these slips, it's about spotting patterns. Seneca wrote, "When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent." I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said. Notice his approach, no blame, just observation. He'd ask, did I act with courage when fear tempted me to stay silent? Did I choose kindness when irritation flared? These questions aren't a test, they're a mirror. Here's how to make this practice tangible tonight. Grab a notebook or even the Notes app on your phone and divide your reflections into 3 simple columns. First, actions. What did I do today that aligned with my values? Maybe you listened patiently to a friend's rant instead of interrupting. Second, reactions. Where did I let external events dictate my calm? Perhaps a rude email hijacked your mood for an hour. Third, adjustments. What's one small shift I'll make tomorrow? Instead of vowing to be perfect, try something specific like, when I feel overwhelmed, I'll take 3 deep breaths before responding. The magic of this ritual lies in its objectivity. Imagine a coach reviewing game footage not to shame the players, but to sharpen their skills. That's the spirit of the evening review. Seneca warned against skipping it, saying, "Nothing is more damaging to character than passing time without reflection." But he also knew the antidote to regret wasn't dwelling, it was course correcting. So tonight, as you turn out the light, ask yourself, where did I grow today? Where did I stumble? Then close the book, literally and figuratively. Tomorrow's pages are blank, and the Stoics would remind you, the past is only useful if it fuels a wiser future. This practice reveals a profound truth. Growth isn't about never failing, it's about never wasting a failure. Every misstep, every moment of lost temper, every anxious spiral, they're all data points, not life sentences. The evening review transforms them into stepping stones. As Seneca put it, while we teach, we learn. And in examining your day, you're not just judging it, you're reclaiming it. Because the unexamined life, as Socrates said, isn't worth living but the examined life. That's where strength is forged. Death is the one guest we all know is coming, yet spend our lives pretending won't arrive. The Stoics had a different approach. They set a place for it at the table. Memento Mori, Latin for remember you must die, wasn't some morbid fixation. It was a wake-up call to live with urgency and integrity. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That's the heart of this practice, not fearing the end, but letting its inevitability sharpen how you use the present. Picture holding an hourglass where the sand never stops flowing. Would you waste a single grain on pettiness, procrastination, or half-hearted efforts? Modern culture treats death like a distant rumor, something that happens to other people someday, but never now. We numb ourselves with distractions, fill calendars with trivialities, and tiptoe around conversations about mortality as if silence could keep it at bay. The Stoics would call this delusional. Seneca put it bluntly, "It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." He wasn't scolding, he was pointing to a liberating truth. When you stop pretending you have endless tomorrows, today becomes unbearably precious. Here's the question to carry with you. If today were your last, what would you stop tolerating? The coworker's passive-aggressive comments you've shrugged off, the dreams you've labeled someday projects, the grudges you've nursed like heirlooms, would any of that make the cut? A Roman general returning from battle would have a slave whisper Memento Mori in his ear during his victory parade, not to spoil the celebration, but to ground him in what mattered. That's the paradox. Remembering death doesn't diminish joy, it heightens it. The taste of morning coffee, the sound of a loved one's laugh, the work that lights you up, these become non-negotiable when time is recognized as finite. Try this exercise tonight. Write down 3 things you'd regret not doing if your life ended unexpectedly. Not grand bucket list items, but the quiet essentials: apologies left unsaid, love unexpressed, talents unused. Then ask, what's stopping me from doing one of them tomorrow? The answer isn't usually lack of time. It's fear masquerading as practicality. The Stoics didn't see death as a threat, they saw it as the ultimate accountability partner. Epictetus told his students, "Keep death and exile before your eyes every day, and you'll never have a base thought or desire." That's the alchemy of Memento Mori. It transforms trivial worries into irrelevancies and magnifies what truly deserves your energy. This practice reveals a startling clarity. Most of what we chase, approval, status, possessions, won't matter on our last day. What will? The relationships we nurtured, the growth we pursued, the moments we were fully present. Seneca wrote, "Life is long if you know how to use it. Time isn't the enemy, forgetting its fragility is. So let death be your compass, not your shadow. Let it pull you toward what matters with the same gravitational force that makes a falling leaf finally touch the earth, not with fear, but with the quiet certainty of having turned every inch of the journey into something alive." Imagine waking up on a freezing morning and deliberately turning the shower knob to cold, not by accident, but by choice. That moment of shock, the gasp for air, the instinct to retreat, that's where Stoic strength is forged. This is the practice of voluntary discomfort, a radical tool championed by Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who told his students, "How can a person become courageous if they only seek comfort?" He didn't just preach this idea, he lived it. Exiled to a barren island, he didn't lament his fate, he used it. The biting wind became his teacher, the hard ground his bed, proving that resilience isn't inherited, it's built through deliberate friction with ease. Voluntary discomfort isn't about masochism or punishing yourself. It's about reminding your body and mind that you're tougher than your cravings for convenience. Think of it like a mental vaccine, small, controlled doses of hardship that inoculate you against life's inevitable setbacks. The modern world offers endless ways to practice this, skipping the snooze button when your bed feels too warm, walking past the dessert menu when your sweet tooth screams, or leaving your phone behind during a walk to sit with your own thoughts. These aren't grand sacrifices, they're micro-rebellions against the illusion that comfort equals happiness. Musonius Rufus had a blunt term for those who avoided discomfort: soft. Not as an insult, but as a diagnosis. He watched students flinch at hard work, complain about simple meals, and panic at minor setbacks. His prescription: systematic exposure to manageable hardship. Ancient Stoics trained with fasting to master hunger, slept on thin mats to conquer attachment to luxury, and practiced poverty to disarm fear of loss. Today, you might start with something as simple as taking the stairs instead of the elevator, or wearing lighter clothing on a chilly day. The goal isn't suffering, it's sovereignty. Every time you choose discomfort over convenience, you're voting for self-mastery. Here's the challenge: before this day ends, pick one small comfort to voluntarily surrender. Maybe it's that second cup of coffee you don't really need, or the urge to check social media during a spare moment. Notice the rationalizations your mind creates: "It's just this once," or "I've had a hard day." That's the voice Stoics aim to quiet. Each time you override it, you strengthen what Epictetus called your inner citadel, the unshakable core no external event can breach. Modern science backs this. Studies on cold exposure show it reduces stress hormones, while intermittent fasting sharpens mental clarity. The Stoics weren't just building character, they were hacking human biology. The deepest lesson of this practice: discomfort is a lie detector for your fears. That jolt of resistance you feel when considering a cold shower or skipping a meal, that's the exact edge where growth happens. Musonius Rufus put it plainly: what's the point of philosophy if it doesn't cure human suffering? Not by removing pain, but by transforming your relationship to it. So tonight, when you're reaching for the thermostat or scrolling for dopamine hits, pause. Ask, what would the unshakable version of me choose? Then do that. Not because it's easy, but because you're training for a life where nothing, not hardship, not loss, not uncertainty, can derail your peace, and that's a power no comfort can buy. Picture yourself floating high above the earth, watching continents shrink to the size of your hand, oceans becoming mere puddles, and cities dissolving into tiny specks of light. This is the view from above, one of Marcus Aurelius's most profound mental exercises, a way to zoom out when life feels overwhelming. The emperor who ruled the known world would write in his private journal, "Take a bird's-eye view of the world with its endless gatherings and ceremonies, voyages and storms, births and burials." He wasn't seeking escape, he was putting problems in their proper proportion. From space, your argument with a coworker, that unpaid bill, even your deepest insecurities, they don't vanish, but they suddenly look very, very small against the backdrop of millennia. This practice isn't about dismissing your struggles, it's about contextualizing them. Imagine holding a single grain of sand, that's your current worry. Now picture the entire beach, that's human history. The Stoics called this cosmic perspective, and it's the antidote to what modern psychologists call catastrophizing, turning molehills into mental mountains. Marcus Aurelius faced barbarian invasions, political betrayals, and a plague that killed millions, yet he anchored himself with this truth: all things are fleeting, and soon you'll be nothing, like Hadrian, like Augustus. Not to depress himself, but to remember that even emperors become dust, and yet life continues. Try this today. When stress starts to tighten your chest, close your eyes and mentally rise until you see your neighborhood from airplane height, then further countries becoming shapes, continents curling like leaves. Notice how the things that felt urgent an hour ago now seem like blips on a radar. A traffic jam won't register, a harsh email disappears. Even grief, when held in this vastness, becomes part of something larger, a shared human experience as old as the stars. The Stoics weren't minimizing pain, they were expanding the frame around it. As Marcus wrote, how quickly all things vanish, their bodies back into nature, their memories into time. Here's the paradox this practice reveals: the smaller you make your problems in the grand scheme, the bigger you become in handling them. That presentation you're nervous about, it won't echo through the cosmos. The mistake you're ruminating on, forgotten faster than you think. Yet this perspective doesn't breed apathy, it fuels purpose. If time erases everything, then what matters isn't the outcome, but the integrity you bring to each moment. A Roman senator fretting over a speech might have been humbled, remembering his words would be lost to history. But that very realization could free him to speak with raw honesty, unshackled from others' opinions. So tonight, step outside, look up. Those stars you see, many are already dead, their light just reaching us now. Your worries have that same fleeting quality, intense up close, insignificant across distance. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet he returned to this truth daily. You are a little soul carrying around a corpse, stark maybe, but also liberating. When you see your life as a brief spark in an infinite night, you stop sweating the small stuff, not because it doesn't matter, but because you've got better things to do with your flicker of time. Like love deeply, create bravely, live fully. The universe won't remember your stumbles, but it will have been changed by your courage, and that's the real shift from "does this matter?" to "how will I make it matter?" There's a reason Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca reached for their journals daily, not to record events but to dissect them. Imagine your mind as a tangled knot of threads, emotions, judgments, reactions all twisted together. Journaling, in the Stoic tradition, isn't about venting. It's the deliberate act of untangling those threads, one deliberate sentence at a time. Modern mindfulness apps might call this processing emotions, but the Stoics were doing it 2,000 years ago with nothing more than parchment and ink. When Seneca wrote, "I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said," he wasn't just reflecting, he was debugging his own psyche. Here's how this ancient practice translates to your life today. Think about the last time you reacted strongly, maybe a flash of anger in traffic or a wave of insecurity after a meeting. In that moment, your brain was flooded with chemicals, your perspective narrowed. But when you later describe the event on paper, something magical happens. You slow it down. You become both participant and observer. Marcus Aurelius did this constantly in meditations, questioning his own impulses. Why am I annoyed? Is this within my control? His journal wasn't a diary, it was a lab where he dissected his reactions under the microscope of reason. Tonight, try this Stoic writing exercise. Pick one emotional reaction from your day: frustration, envy, pride, and dissect it like a scientist. First, describe what happened objectively, stripping away interpretations. My colleague interrupted me in the meeting, not they disrespected me. Next, identify the underlying belief driving your emotion. I felt humiliated because I tied my worth to being heard. Finally, ask the Stoic question: how would my best self have responded? This three-step autopsy: fact, belief, ideal response doesn't just clarify emotions, it rewires reflexes. The modern twist: pair this with mindfulness. Before writing, take 3 breaths to ground yourself. Notice where the emotion lies in your body: a clenched jaw, a heavy chest. The Stoics didn't have neuroscience, but they intuited what we now know. Writing engages the prefrontal cortex, putting brakes on the amygdala's panic signals. Seneca called evening journaling putting the day on trial, but today we might call it cognitive behavioral therapy in its purest form. Your task tonight isn't to write pages, just one paragraph analyzing a single reaction. The magic isn't in length, it's in precision. Like a sculptor chipping away marble to reveal the form beneath, you're carving away irrationality to uncover clarity. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you interpret it that matters. Your journal is where you reclaim that power, one examined thought at a time. This practice reveals a profound truth. Emotions aren't orders to obey, but data to interpret. By writing them down, you create space between stimulus and response, the very space where Stoic wisdom grows. Tonight, when you put pen to paper, remember you're not just journaling, you're conducting the most important meeting of the day, with yourself. Ever been cut off in traffic and felt that surge of anger? The clenched jaw, the impulse to honk or tailgate? That split-second reaction is exactly what Epictetus called an impression, and mastering it lies at the heart of Stoic wisdom. He taught that between any event and our reaction, there's a critical space, often missed, where freedom resides. This is the discipline of Ascent, the practice of pausing before letting an impression dictate your emotions or actions. Picture it like a gatekeeper at the door of your mind, examining each thought before granting it entry. Epictetus, the former slave turned philosopher, put it plainly: it's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. Road rage offers a perfect case study. When another driver swerves into your lane, your first impression might be they did that on purpose. But here's the Stoic challenge: that's not reality, it's your interpretation of reality. The raw facts: a car changed lanes abruptly, full stop. Everything else, the assumed disrespect, the malicious intent, is a story you've added. Epictetus urged his students to interrogate these automatic narratives. Is this impression true? Is it helpful? Most crucially, do I have to accept it? That pause, even just 2 seconds long, is where your power lies. Now apply this beyond traffic. When your boss sends a terse email, does your mind leap to "I'm about to be fired"? When a friend cancels plans, do you assume they're avoiding me? These knee-jerk impressions are like sparks. If you catch them early, you prevent a fire. The Stoics called this assenting to impressions, and it's a muscle you can strengthen. Start small. Next time someone's tone seems off, challenge your assumption. Maybe they're stressed, maybe you misheard, maybe it's irrelevant to your peace. Either way, Epictetus used a vivid metaphor. Our minds are like bowls of water, and impressions are like stones tossed in. If the bowl is unsteady, if we haven't trained our ascent, the water sloshes wildly. But with practice, the bowl steadies, the ripples calm. This isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about discerning which deserve your energy. Ancient Stoics would practice with trivial irritations, a spilled drink, a noisy neighbor, to prepare for life's bigger shocks. Here's your challenge today. Pick one automatic reaction you'll question. Maybe it's interpreting silence as disapproval or seeing a competitor's success as your failure. When the impression strikes, literally say out loud or in your head, "Is this true? Is this useful?" You'll uncover a liberating truth. Most of what upsets us isn't the world's actions, but our unchecked assumptions about them. As Epictetus said, don't let the force of an impression sweep you off your feet. Stand in that pause, choose your response. That's where real control begins. Marcus Aurelius faced a plague that killed millions, political betrayals that threatened his empire, and constant wars at the borders. Yet he wrote in his private journal, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This wasn't just lofty philosophy, it was the operating system of his life. Consider Thomas Edison, who famously reframed his laboratory, burning to the ground at the height of his career. As flames consumed years of research, he told his son, "Go get your mother, she'll never see a fire like this again." Then he got to work rebuilding the next morning. Most would see catastrophe. Edison saw a clean slate. That's the Stoic mindset in action, not denying the setback but dismantling it for parts. The engine of this practice is a simple but radical question. How could this thing I'm resisting actually serve me? A musician losing hearing might seem like a career ender, until you remember Beethoven composed his greatest symphonies while deaf, relying on vibrations felt through the piano. A business collapse might feel like failure until it forces the founder to pivot toward their true passion. Even personal heartbreak, when metabolized properly, can become the raw material for deeper empathy or creative expression. The Stoics didn't just tolerate obstacles, they reverse-engineered them. Take the story of Admiral James Stockdale, shot down over Vietnam and held as a POW for 7 years. Tortured routinely, kept in solitary confinement, he later credited Stoicism for his survival. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, he wrote. That's the alchemy of turning obstacles into fuel, seeing the chains but also the keys hidden within them. Stockdale used his captivity to develop mental resilience techniques, tapping on walls in code to communicate with fellow prisoners. His worst nightmare became his masterclass in leadership. Now bring this home. Look at your own life. What's one current challenge that feels like a roadblock? Maybe it's a financial strain forcing you to budget creatively, revealing spending habits you'd never questioned. Perhaps it's a rejection letter that pushes you to refine your skills beyond what complacency would allow. Even chronic pain, as philosopher and migraine sufferer Friedrich Nietzsche discovered, can sharpen focus. To those human beings who are of any concern to me, I wish suffering, desolation, sickness, ill treatment, indignities. Harsh words, but he knew growth doesn't bloom in comfort. Here's the reframing exercise. Grab paper and divide it into 2 columns. On the left, write your obstacle in blunt terms: missed promotion, failed project, health diagnosis. On the right, answer: what might this make possible that success couldn't? A missed promotion might free you to explore entrepreneurship. A failed project could reveal a mentor in someone who helped you through it. A health scare often becomes the wake-up call for lifestyle changes that add years to your life. The obstacle isn't just something to overcome, it's the whetstone sharpening your edge. Marcus Aurelius didn't have a magic wand to remove hardships. He had something better, a mindset that transformed them into teachers. Your challenges aren't detours on the path, they are the path. As the Stoics practiced, so you can too. When life hands you rocks, don't just build a wall, build a fortress. Every interaction, every moment of friction carries a hidden threshold, a fraction of a second where choice still exists before reaction takes over. The Stoics called this the Prosaic, or the discipline of attention, the practice of inserting a conscious pause between stimulus and response. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient philosophers intuited. The amygdala, our brain's alarm system, reacts to perceived threats in milliseconds, while the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason, takes nearly half a second longer to engage. That gap is where Stoic wisdom lives. Epictetus described it as the first defense, not letting impressions carry you away. Imagine standing at the edge of that mental cliff, feeling the pull of anger or anxiety, then stepping back just long enough to ask, what story am I telling myself here? This isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about creating space to meet them. Consider a heated text exchange where words fly faster than thoughts. Without the pause, you're a passenger in your own mind. With it, you become the pilot. Marcus Aurelius used his signet ring as a tactile reminder. Each time he touched it, he'd check, is this reaction serving my principles? Modern equivalents could be anything: a watch on your wrist, a pen in your pocket, even the feel of your phone case. The object doesn't matter, the interruption of autopilot does. Think back to your last conflict, a misunderstood comment, a work critique that stung. Replay it with a 3-second pause inserted. How might the script have changed? Research from the University of Michigan shows that even brief delays in response reduce defensive reactions by over 40%. The Stoics were early architects of emotional intelligence, recognizing that self-awareness isn't innate, it's built through deliberate rituals. Seneca would write letters and wait a day before sending them, knowing time dissolves heat. Here's how to practice today. Choose a tactile anchor, a ring, a bracelet, even the sensation of your feet on the floor. When tension arises, touch it and mentally step back. First, name the emotion. This is frustration. Next, strip the interpretation. They ignored me becomes they haven't replied. Finally, align your response with your values. How would my best self engage? The pause isn't passive, it's the ultimate act of agency. What makes this radical is its simplicity. You're not waiting to control the emotion, you're creating room to choose your relationship to it. Like a dancer pausing mid-step to recalibrate, you reclaim rhythm in chaos. As Marcus wrote, the nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. That calm isn't the absence of storms, it's the space between lightning and thunder where you decide what happens next. Picture a ship without a compass. It might drift with the currents, reacting to every wave but never truly steering toward a destination. That's what life feels like when we haven't defined our virtues. The Stoics didn't just admire qualities like wisdom and courage from a distance. They used them as daily waypoints, the fixed stars by which they navigated chaos. Marcus Aurelius kept a list in his journal: integrity, dignity, hard work, self-mastery, not as lofty ideals but as practical tools. When faced with betrayal, he asked, what would a just person do? When fear arose, how would courage respond? These weren't abstract questions, they were his operating system. Your virtues aren't just words, they're the guardrails that keep you from veering off course when emotions run high. Think of a time you regretted a reaction, maybe snapping at a loved one or staying silent when you should have spoken up. In that moment, what principle went missing? The Stoics identified 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom to discern what's right, courage to act despite fear, justice to treat others fairly, and temperance to avoid excess. But your personal list might include others, perhaps curiosity, compassion, or resilience. The key is specificity. Be good is vague. Speak truth even when it's uncomfortable is actionable. Here's how to make this tangible today. Grab a sheet of paper and divide it into 2 columns. On the left, list 3 virtues you want to embody. Not what you think you should value, but what truly resonates. Maybe it's patience when teaching your child to tie their shoes, or generosity when a coworker takes credit for your idea. On the right, write one concrete way each virtue will guide you today. For example, if I choose courage, I'll voice my unpopular opinion in the team meeting. The Stoics didn't just admire virtues, they wore them like armor into daily battles. Consider the story of Cato the Younger, a Roman senator who embodied Stoic virtues so fiercely that even his enemies respected him. When Julius Caesar offered him clemency to gain political favor, Cato refused, not out of pride, but because accepting would compromise his integrity. He famously said, "I would not be beholden to a tyrant for my life." That's the power of clearly defined virtues. They turn decisions from dilemmas into reflexes. You might never face a choice that dramatic, but you'll face versions of it daily, between convenience and character, between comfort and growth. Your task isn't to become a philosopher-statesman. It's to identify the 3 words that, if you lived by them relentlessly, would make you proud of the person you're becoming. Then, like Marcus Aurelius reviewing his principles each morning, use them as a filter for the small but consequential moments ahead. When irritation flares in a long line, what would patience look like? When gossip starts at lunch, how does integrity intervene? Virtues aren't for monuments, they're for grocery stores and group chats and the quiet spaces where no one's watching but you. The Stoics knew this truth. Clarity about who you want to be makes the how infinitely clearer. So name your virtues. Write them where you'll see them: on your phone case, your bathroom mirror, the lock screen that greets you 100 times a day. Then watch what happens when you stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming?" That's when philosophy stops being something you study and starts being something you live. Epictetus once told his students, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." This simple anatomical observation holds a profound Stoic truth, that silence isn't just the absence of noise, but a disciplined practice of restraint. Imagine standing in a heated debate, your pulse quickening with the urge to interrupt, to correct, to prove your point. Now picture instead the power of staying quiet, not out of passivity, but from the conscious choice that some battles aren't worth your breath and some truths don't need your defense. The Stoics didn't see silence as weakness, they saw it as a fortress. Modern culture treats silence like a void to be filled: endless scrolling, constant notifications, the compulsive need to document every thought. We confuse volume with value, mistaking more words for more wisdom. But Epictetus warned, if you pour a handful of salt into a cup of water, the water becomes undrinkable. But if you pour it into a river, it's unnoticeable. Your mind is that river. The more you dilute it with unnecessary speech, the less potent your words become when they truly matter. Think of the last time you regretted speaking, maybe a hasty text sent in anger or a secret shared too freely. Now recall a time silence served you, perhaps biting your tongue during a provocation or listening deeply when someone needed to be heard. Here's the challenge: for the next 24 hours, become an anthropologist of your own speech. Notice the impulses that drive you to talk. Is it to contribute or to impress? To connect or to compete? The Stoics distinguished between logos, reasoned speech, and flaria, idle chatter. When a colleague brags about their achievements, observe the itch to one-up them, then let it pass. When social media beckons you to opine on every controversy, ask, does this add light or just heat? Silence, practiced deliberately, becomes a filter for what's essential. History's most influential Stoics understood this. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, was known for his past speech. When a talkative student rambled on, Zeno replied, "The reason you have 2 ears and 1 mouth is so you can listen more and speak less." Contrast this with today's influencers, measuring their worth in likes and word count. The irony: it's the quiet minds we remember most. Think of the Dalai Lama's pauses between answers, or Lincoln's measured speeches amid a war-torn nation. Their power came not from filling space, but from mastering it. Tonight, try this exercise. Sit for 5 minutes in purposeful silence. not meditation, not zoning out, just actively not speaking. Notice the urges that arise to comment, to narrate, to fill the void. That discomfort is the muscle of restraint growing stronger. Epictetus promised no one ever regretted their silence. But history brims with regrets from unchecked words. Your voice is a tool, not a toy. Wield it like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, because sometimes the strongest statement isn't what you say, but what you choose not to. Imagine waking up tomorrow to find every social media platform wiped clean, no likes, no followers, no metrics tracking your worth in digital currency. How would you spend your time? Who would you become without the invisible audience shaping your choices? This is the heart of the Stoic practice of contempt for fame, not a rejection of achievement, but a liberation from the prison of others' opinions. Cato the Younger, the Roman senator who became a Stoic icon, embodied this when he walked barefoot through snow to toughen himself against comfort, and when he openly opposed Julius Caesar knowing it would cost him favor. His biographer wrote, "He cared not what others thought of him, only what he thought of himself." In an age where our self-worth is often outsourced to notifications and algorithms, that indifference to external validation isn't just philosophy, it's rebellion. Social media has rewired our brains to crave validation in ways the ancient Stoics would have recognized as toxic. Every scroll through curated feeds subtly trains us to ask, will this get attention? Before we ask, is this true to me? Studies show the average person checks their phone 58 times a day, with dopamine spikes from likes mirroring those from gambling. Seneca saw this coming 2,000 years ago. How much better to heal your own wounds than to beg for applause from those who ignore you, the Stoic alternative. Measure your worth by an internal scorecard. When Cato was ridiculed for wearing outdated clothing in the Senate, he didn't adjust his toga, he doubled down, making his disregard for fashion a statement of integrity. His reputation wasn't destroyed, it was distilled into something unshakable. Consider the modern parallels, that pang when your post gets fewer likes than expected. The anxiety before sharing an unpopular opinion, these are test moments. The Stoics would have called them prosaic opportunities to practice awareness. Marcus Aurelius ruled the known world yet wrote, "It's silly to try to escape other people's faults. They are inescapable. Just try to escape your own." Translation: you can't control others' judgments, but you can refuse to let them rent space in your mind. When a musician writes songs hoping to trend rather than to express truth, or when a student chooses a major for prestige over passion, they've handed their compass to strangers. Here's the experiment for one day. Act as if your actions will never be seen or praised, not in performative asceticism, but in quiet authenticity. Eat what truly nourishes you, not what would impress Instagram. Speak your real thoughts, not the polished versions that fit the room. The Stoics weren't advocating invisibility, they were demanding sovereignty. As Epictetus put it, if you wish to improve, be content to appear clueless or stupid. That's the courage to be a beginner, to ask dumb questions, to create art that might flop because the alternative is a life spent editing yourself into someone else's narrative. The irony, those who have changed history, from Van Gogh painting without buyers to scientists laboring in obscurity, rarely chased fame. They were too busy obeying their inner directive. Your legacy isn't built on the sand of others' opinions, but on the bedrock of what you know to be true. So tonight, as you hover over that post button, ask the Stoic question, would I still do this if the world turned away? The answer might just lead you back to yourself. You've probably made plans this week, maybe a dinner date, a project deadline, or a weekend getaway. Now think, how many times did you silently add "if everything goes right" to those plans? That tiny mental asterisk is what the Stoics called the reserve clause, a conscious acknowledgement that life has veto power over even our best laid plans. Seneca put it bluntly, fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling. The reserve clause isn't about pessimism, it's about partnering with reality. Ancient merchants shipping goods across the Mediterranean would add Dio Vol and God willing to their contracts, not as empty piety, but as a reminder that storms, pirates, or broken masts could rewrite their schedules in an instant. Take a modern business scenario. You've spent months preparing a product launch, coordinating teams, and booking a venue. Then a supplier delay pushes your timeline back a month. Without the reserve clause, this becomes a crisis. Anger at the supplier, stress over rescheduling, sleepless nights recalculating costs. With it, you anticipated the possibility. Your plans included if supply chains allow. The setback stings, but it doesn't derail you because you've already psychologically budgeted for life's unpredictability. The Stoics weren't suggesting you abandon planning. They were urging you to plan differently, to hold goals firmly but methods loosely. This mindset shifts frustration into focus. When your flight gets cancelled, instead of fuming at the gate agent who didn't cause the weather, you pull out your backup options. Why? Because you packed the reserve clause alongside your boarding pass. Marcus Aurelius, who spent years on military campaigns where weather, disease, or enemy actions could upend strategies, wrote, "The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing because it requires readiness for unforeseen blows." Modern psychology calls this stress inoculation, exposing yourself to manageable uncertainties to build resilience. The reserve clause is precisely that, a mental vaccine against entitlement to smooth sailing. Here's how to practice it today. Next time you state a plan, whether aloud or in your head, append "fate permitting," not as a passive whisper, but as an active reminder that adaptability is part of the plan. I'll finish the report by Friday. Fate permitting means you'll work diligently, but if your child gets sick or your internet fails, you'll pivot without self-recrimination. The power isn't in the phrase, it's in the mental architecture it builds. Like a tree that bends in wind rather than snapping, you're engineering flexibility into your expectations. The real test comes when fate doesn't permit. That's when the reserve clause reveals its wisdom. It doesn't just cushion the fall, it gives you traction to rise. A cancelled event becomes time to refine your pitch. A missed connection opens space for an unexpected conversation. Seneca, whose own life was upended by exile, wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction." Your plans are the gem, life's interruptions are the polish. The Stoics didn't see the reserve clause as surrender, they saw it as strategy. Because when you stop fighting the fact that plans change, you start seeing the opportunities those changes unveil. Seneca once wrote a letter to his friend Lucilius with a striking challenge. Set aside a certain number of days to eat only the plainest food, wear your oldest clothes, and ask yourself, is this what I used to fear? This was no mere thought experiment, it was a full sensory rehearsal for loss, designed to expose a startling truth. The comforts we cling to often shackle us more than they serve us. Picture sleeping on the floor for a night when you have a perfectly good bed, or wearing that slightly frayed shirt tucked in the back of your closet instead of your favorite designer label. These acts aren't self-punishment, they're liberation rituals. The Stoics called it pauper, as voluntary poverty, not as a lifestyle, but as an occasional reset button for the soul. Modern life bombards us with infinite upgrades, the newest phone model, the trendier coffee order, the algorithmically curated wardrobe essentials. Yet Seneca observed 2,000 years ago, it is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the one who craves more. His solution, periodic simplicity sprints. Imagine declaring a no-spend day where you bypass the drive-through and make lunch from pantry staples, or commit to a digital sunset, turning off notifications after 6 p.m. To rediscover the weight of a paper book in your hands, these pauses disrupt autopilot consumption, creating space to ask, do I own my possessions or do they own me? History's most resilient minds practiced this deliberately. The Roman general Scipio Africanus, who conquered Carthage, kept a single set of rough linens for his campaigns despite having access to imperial luxuries. Why to remember comfort was a choice, not a necessity. Today's equivalent might be leaving your wallet at home during a walk, resisting the reflex to grab a latte, and noticing how your mind scrambles for justification. I deserve this, or it's just $5. That mental squirm is where growth happens. Here's your challenge. Pick one luxury to surrender this week, not forever, just long enough to feel its absence. Maybe it's skipping your streaming subscription binge for an evening of journaling, or trading your ergonomic office chair for a wooden stool during a work session. Notice the rationalizations that arise: this is silly, or I've earned this, and meet them with Seneca's question, what if this were gone tomorrow, would I still be whole? The magic lies in what rushes in to fill the space left by absence. That hour you'd normally spend scrolling becomes time for a conversation with your spouse. The money saved from skipped takeout becomes a donation that means more than another meal. As Seneca wrote, poverty adjusted to the law of nature is great wealth. Not because deprivation feels good, but because it recalibrates your measurement of enough. Try this tonight. Eat the simplest meal in your kitchen: rice, beans, and apple without distractions. Taste each bite as if it were your first. That's the Stoic secret. Scarcity, practiced intentionally, doesn't shrink your world. It expands your gratitude for what's always been there. Marcus Aurelius often pictured his mind as an impenetrable fortress, a citadel where no external chaos could breach the walls unless he lowered the drawbridge himself. This wasn't poetic imagery, it was psychological warfare strategy. In the middle of leading Rome through wars, plagues, and betrayals, he'd remind himself, the mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. The impediment to action advances action. That fortress wasn't built of stone, but of disciplined perception. Modern neuroscience echoes this. Studies on resilience show that people who view stress as a challenge rather than a threat activate prefrontal cortex pathways that enhance focus and problem solving, essentially constructing their own neural citadels. Your inner citadel isn't a mythical trait reserved for emperors or saints. It's the daily practice of choosing what gets through your mental gates. Think of it like a social media algorithm for your thoughts. You can't control every input, but you control what gets amplified. A traffic jam, that's noise outside the walls. Your irritation, that's the gatekeeper deciding whether to let it storm the courtyard. Cognitive behavioral therapy, the gold standard for mental resilience today, operates on this same Stoic principle. Events don't distress us, our interpretations do. When you reframe, this meeting will be a disaster, to this meeting will test my preparation, you're not denying reality, you're manning the battlements. But citadels crumble when neglected. What weakens yours? Maybe it's the midnight scroll through doom-filled news, or the co-worker's complaint you passively absorb over coffee. Epictetus warned, if you don't wish to be irritable, don't feed your irritability. Every time you replay an insult mentally or catastrophize a minor setback, you're leaving the gate unguarded. Conversely, what strengthens it? The morning journaling session that sorts mental clutter before the day begins. The walk where you process emotions instead of numbing them with podcasts. Even the simple act of pausing before reacting, that's mortar between your bricks. Modern life bombards us with siege engines designed to breach calm, notifications as arrows, productivity culture as battering rams. The Stoic defense, selective engagement. When Marcus wrote, you don't have to turn this into something, it doesn't have to disturb you, he was prescribing cognitive disarmament. A rude email can't scale your walls unless you hoist it up with obsessive rereading. A missed promotion can't torch your confidence unless you douse it in self-doubt. Here's the practice. Tonight, audit your mental gatekeeping. List 3 things that invaded your peace today, not the events themselves, but the thoughts you allowed to rampage. Then list 3 moments you held the high ground. The goal isn't to build a moat against life, but to cultivate a space where you decide what deserves your garrison's attention. As Marcus knew, even an emperor's real power wasn't his armies. It was his ability to stand undisturbed in the eye of the storm, his citadel unshaken because he alone held the keys. Picture standing backstage before a big speech, your palms slick with sweat, heart pounding like a drum, not because you're unprepared, but because your mind keeps looping the worst-case scenario. What if they laugh? What if I forget my lines? Now imagine walking out there armed with a secret weapon. You've already rehearsed their rejection, not as a fear, but as a fact. This is the Stoic practice of preemptive rejection, and it flips stage fright on its head. Seneca, who faced exile and political backlash, wrote, "Rehearse death." To say this is to tell a person to rehearse his freedom. Replace death with rejection, and you've got the modern application. Rehearse failure to disarm its power over you. Public speaking is just the visible arena. This practice applies anywhere fear of judgment holds you back, that business pitch you've been hesitating to send. Draft the rejection email you imagine receiving, then read it aloud. The art exhibition you're scared to submit to. Picture the curt, not selected notification. Then notice how your hands don't actually crumble. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils, but it's really just exposure therapy for the soul. Comedians know this trick instinctively. They test material in small clubs, enduring silence or heckling, so when the big stage comes, silence isn't a terror, it's data. Here's the twist: preemptive rejection isn't about expecting the worst, it's about realizing the worst is survivable. Think of Eleanor Roosevelt, who faced vicious criticism as First Lady. Her antidote: do one thing every day that scares you, not to conquer fear, but to normalize it. The entrepreneur who pitches 20 investors expecting 19 nos isn't being pessimistic, they're vaccinating themselves against disappointment. Each no stings less because they've metabolized it in advance. Marcus Aurelius would scribble reminders like, when you're offended by someone's rudeness, ask yourself, can the world exist without rude people? Translation: rejection isn't an anomaly, it's part of the terrain. Now apply this to your life. What bold move have you avoided because the specter of no looms too large, asking for a raise, publishing your writing? Dancing at a wedding, try this exercise. Write down the rejection you fear most, the eye roll, the dismissal, the silence, then script your response. If they say my idea is naive, I'll ask for specifics. If they mock my art, I'll thank them for their time and keep creating. The moment rejection shifts from a vague monster to a specific scenario with countermoves, its fangs dull. History's most resilient figures mastered this. J.K. Rowling pinned her early rejection letters to her wall as fuel. Thomas Edison reframed 10,000 failed experiments as ways not to make a light bulb. The Stoics would have recognized their strategy, not just enduring failure, but dissecting it until it loses its power to shock. So tonight, play the tape all the way through, past the no, past the flush of embarrassment, to the part where you're still breathing, still learning, still moving forward. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the certainty that you've already survived the thing you're afraid of. Seneca called anger a brief insanity, a fire that burns the hand of the one who holds it tighter. Picture a modern driver laying on the horn in traffic, face flushed, pulse racing, as if their outrage could melt the gridlock ahead. 2,000 years later, the triggers have changed, but the human wiring remains the same. What makes anger so corrosive, Seneca argued, isn't just the initial spark, it's the way we fan it with storytelling. They cut me off on purpose, my boss disrespects me. The world's against me. Each mental sentence pours gasoline on the flame. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient insight. The amygdala's anger response lasts just 90 seconds unless we sustain it with internal narratives. Here's the Stoic interruption technique tested by gladiators and CEOs alike. First, freeze the frame. When anger surges, physically pause, whether it's clenching your fists or feeling your feet on the floor. Seneca advised his students to take a walk or count the stars, not to suppress anger, but to create space between impulse and action. Next, interrogate the story. Ask what evidence proves this was intentional. That driver who merged aggressively might be rushing to a hospital. Your partner's sharp tone could stem from a sleepless night. Finally, reframe the stakes. Marcus Aurelius would ask, will this matter in a month, a year? Most conflicts that feel existential in the moment become footnotes with time. Now contrast this with today's outrage culture, social media pile-ons, keyboard warfare, the dopamine hit of righteous indignation. The Stoics would have recognized these as ancient traps in digital disguise. When a tweet sparks your temper, imagine Socrates standing over your shoulder, murmuring, "Is this worth your soul's disturbance?" He wasn't advocating passivity. He modeled razor-sharp discourse without venom. During his trial for corrupting youth, faced with a death sentence, he debated his accusers with logic, not malice. An unexamined anger isn't worth expressing, he might say today. Your challenge isn't to never feel anger, it's to become its architect rather than its arsonist. Next time your blood boils, try Seneca's pen test. Write the blistering email or text you're composing in your head, then wait 24 hours before sending. 90% of those messages never need to see light. The ones that do, they'll be sharper for the cooling period. Anger, channeled through Stoic filters, transforms from a wildfire into a laser capable of cutting through injustice without burning down your integrity. That's the difference between reacting like a Roman mob and responding like a philosopher king. Sand slips through the hourglass whether you watch it or not, each grain a moment you'll never reclaim. Seneca's piercing words on the shortness of life cut through 2,000 years of human delusion. It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Picture this, you're handed 1,000 gold coins with the instruction to spend them wisely, yet you let them trickle through your fingers while staring at the horizon, waiting for some undefined later. That's how we treat time, our most finite currency, deferring dreams, silencing calls to loved ones, shelving passions for a mythical, right moment that never comes. The Stoics didn't just warn against procrastination, they exposed it as a form of self-betrayal. Consider the modern paradox: we live longer than ever, yet feel time-starved. We cram calendars with meetings and scrolls, mistaking motion for meaning. Seneca diagnosed this malaise long before smartphones fractured our attention. People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they're most wasteful. That project you've been delaying, that conversation you keep rescheduling, that creative spark you've buried under someday, these aren't just unfinished tasks. They're leaks in your hourglass. The Roman philosopher wasn't scolding, he was handing you a repair kit. Here's the Stoic intervention. First, confront the illusion of plenty. We act as if time is a renewable resource like breath or daylight. But unlike dawn, which returns unbidden, your years don't reset. Marcus Aurelius meditated on this nightly. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. Not to breed anxiety, but to ignite urgency. Second, spot your shadow postponements. These aren't obvious delays like missing a deadline, but subtle dodges: researching instead of writing, networking instead of creating, planning instead of living. Seneca called this being busy to avoid being alive. Now the pivot. Tonight, try Seneca's Memento Mori journal drill. List 3 things you've deferred, not logistical tasks like laundry, but soul deferrals. Learn guitar, reconcile with my sister, start the side hustle. Next to each answer, if I knew I had 6 months left, would this still be postponed? The discomfort you feel is your compass pointing toward what matters. History's most impactful lives share one thread. They treated time as a non-refundable investment. Michelangelo carved David from a discarded marble block others deemed flawed, whispering, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free." No waiting for perfect conditions, Frida Kahlo began painting during convalescence, transforming pain into art. Their genius wasn't in having more time, it was in refusing to let fear or trivialities hijack the time they had. Your hourglass isn't faulty, your hands might be cupped too tightly around the wrong grains. Seneca's remedy: begin at once to live and count each day as a separate life. Not through grand gestures, but by reclaiming the scraps we normally discard. The commute turned into a podcast on philosophy. The lunch break spent sketching instead of scrolling, the single sentence written before bed. Procrastination isn't defeated in marathon sessions, but in moments where you choose now over later. So tonight, as you watch sand gather at the base of your day, ask, what one thing will I move from someday to today, even if it's just the first stitch in a tapestry I may never finish? Because the Stoics knew a secret: a life isn't made of years but of nows, and the courage to stop waiting for a better now to arrive. Zeno stood on the deck of a merchant ship as it split apart in the storm, watching his entire fortune sink into the Mediterranean, only to later call this shipwreck the best thing that ever happened to me. Why? Because losing everything forced him to reinvent himself in Athens, where he began studying philosophy under a street-side philosopher, eventually founding Stoicism itself. This is the power of role models in the Stoic tradition, not perfect heroes to worship, but real humans who transformed adversity into advantage. When Marcus Aurelius faced the pressures of imperial rule, he didn't look to gods for guidance. He filled his journals with lessons from mentors like his Stoic teacher Rusticus, whose discipline shaped his worldview. Think of historical role models as living textbooks on resilience. Take Epictetus, born a slave whose leg was deliberately broken by his owner, yet who later taught that no one can hurt you unless you let them, a philosophy so potent it echoed through Roman bathhouses and now fuels modern cognitive therapy. Or consider modern figures like James Stockdale, the Navy pilot who survived 7 years as a POW by applying Epictetus' teachings, later saying Stoicism gave him a sword to cut through the wire of Vietnam's prison camps. The common thread: these individuals didn't just endure hardship, they reverse-engineered their struggles into operating systems for unshakable strength. Your task isn't to find someone who never stumbled, but to study how they rose after falling. Pick one figure, historical or contemporary, whose resilience resonates with you. Maybe it's Nelson Mandela, spending 27 years in prison yet emerging without bitterness, or the Japanese poet Kobayashi Issa, who wrote haikus about cherry blossoms after burying his children. Research their habits like an archaeologist uncovering tools. How did Mandela maintain hope in solitary confinement? He exercised daily in his cell and secretly studied Afrikaans to understand his jailers. How did Stockdale resist torture? He communicated in tap code with fellow prisoners, turning isolation into solidarity. These aren't just stories, they're blueprints. Start small. Dedicate 15 minutes this week to studying your chosen figure's turning points. When entrepreneur Sarah Blakely was rejected by manufacturers for her Spanx prototypes, how did she reframe no as not yet? When Beethoven composed his 9th symphony while deaf, what mental frameworks allowed him to hear the music internally? The goal isn't imitation, but illumination, spotting the Stoic principles they applied unconsciously. As Seneca wrote, we need to set our eyes on some good person and keep them before us as models, not to copy their path, but to map our own. History's resilient figures share one trait: they treated obstacles as curriculum. Your role model might be a grandmother who survived war with humor, a coach who turned losses into lessons, or even a fictional character like Atticus Finch standing firm in prejudice's storm. What matters is the question you ask after studying them, not could I face what they faced, but how will I use their compass to navigate my own storms? Because role models don't just inspire, they equip, and in the words of Marcus Aurelius, that's how you wake up each morning saying, "Today I shall meet interference, ingratitude, arrogance, but none of them can touch me." Epictetus once told his students, when you're offended by someone's arrogance, ask yourself, have you never behaved similarly? That question cracks open one of the most uncomfortable yet transformative Stoic practices, seeing every fault we spot in others as a two-way mirror reflecting our own hidden struggles. Picture this, you're fuming after a meeting where your coworker dismissed your idea without consideration. The narrative in your head paints them as the villain, closed-minded, disrespectful. But here's the Stoic twist. What if your outrage isn't just about their behavior, but about recognizing a shadow of yourself in them? Maybe last month you brushed off an intern's suggestion because it didn't fit your vision. Or perhaps that time you interrupted a colleague mid-sentence flashes through your mind. Suddenly, the mirror flips and the person you're judging becomes your unwitting teacher. This isn't about self-flagellation, it's about radical self-awareness. The Stoics called this prosaic, the discipline of attention turned inward. Imagine your irritation as a flare gun highlighting areas where you're still under construction. That teammate who never admits mistakes, your pulse spikes because you recognize your own resistance to vulnerability. The boss who micromanages, your frustration echoes the times you've struggled to trust others with tasks. Even road rage follows this pattern. The driver cutting you off triggers you because on some level you resent your own moments of impatience. Epictetus, the former slave who endured cruelty yet preached compassion, framed it bluntly. What troubles people isn't things, but their judgments about things. Workplace conflicts offer the perfect training ground for this practice. Take the classic example of the chronically late colleague. Before venting to your work friends, try the Stoic interrogation. When have I underestimated others' time? Maybe you've kept your spouse waiting at dinner while finishing just one more email, or arrived late to a friend's event because traffic was bad. The difference, your brain excuses your own delays as circumstantial while judging others as character flaws. This double standard is what psychologists now call the fundamental attribution error, but the Stoics diagnosed it 2 millennia earlier. Marcus Aurelius journaled reminders like, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant. But I cannot be angry with them, for we are made for cooperation. Here's how to make this actionable today. The next time someone's behavior grates on you, pause and play detective with your own history. That junior employee who seems overly needy for validation. Recall your first job, hungry for reassurance. The client who nitpicks every detail. Remember the project where your perfectionism slowed the team. This isn't about excusing poor behavior. It's about dissolving the illusion that you're separate from it. The Japanese have a proverb, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. We often hammer others for the very traits we fear in ourselves. The transformative power lies in what happens next. Instead of simmering in resentment, you might ask your arrogant coworker, "Help me understand your perspective on this. I want to learn." Suddenly, the dynamic shifts from adversarial to collaborative. Or you might journal about why a particular flaw triggers you so deeply, uncovering an old wound like the time a teacher humiliated you for speaking up, wiring you to equate assertiveness with rudeness. Epictetus promised, no one can hurt you without your consent, but the deeper truth is that no one can reveal your hidden edges without your willingness to look. This mirror works both ways though. Just as others' flaws reflect your growing edges, your strengths can reveal their potential. That disorganized teammate might spark your patience because you remember your own journey toward systems. The defensive intern could soften when you share how feedback once terrified you too. Stoicism was never about solitary perfection. It's a relational philosophy. As Marcus wrote, men exist for the sake of one another. Teach them or endure them. So tonight, try this exercise. List 3 traits that irritate you in others, then hunt for their echoes in your behavior. Not to shame yourself, but to map your blind spots. That critical friend, they might be mirroring your own unspoken self-judgments, the partner who never listens. Perhaps they're showing you where you've been distracted lately. The mirror doesn't lie, it just waits for us to have the courage to look, and that's where the real growth begins, not in fixing others, but in recognizing that every judgment we cast is secretly a letter to our future selves. There's an old story about a Stoic philosopher walking through the marketplace when a stranger spat in his face. Instead of retaliating or even wiping it away, he calmly said, "I wasn't aware it was raining." That wasn't passive acceptance, it was a masterclass in reframing. The Stoics saw every slight, every setback, even every heartbreak as something far more empowering, a test. Not from a vengeful God, but from the universe itself, designed to reveal and strengthen your inner resolve. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "The impediment to action advances action." What stands in the way becomes the way. That's the essence of the Stoic test, the understanding that life isn't happening to you but for your growth. Think of the last time you faced a crushing disappointment, maybe a rejection letter, a failed project, or a betrayal. In the moment, it likely felt like the universe had dealt you a cruel hand. But what if you flipped the script? What if that rejection was actually a pop quiz on resilience, forcing you to refine your skills? That betrayal, a final exam on discernment, teaching you to trust your instincts. The Stoics called this prosaic, the art of meeting adversity not as a victim but as a student. When Epictetus was a slave, his owner broke his leg deliberately to humiliate him. Instead of crumbling, he used the injury to prove a radical point. Lameness is an impediment to the leg but not to the will. His body was shackled, but his mindset became unbreakable. Here's how this plays out in modern life. A few years ago, I lost a job I'd poured my heart into, a role I thought defined my worth. For weeks, I spiraled, convinced I'd failed. Then I stumbled on Seneca's words, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." So I began treating the experience as a test, not why me. But what's being asked of me? The answer: to rebuild without bitterness, to network without desperation, to prove my value wasn't tied to a title. That shift didn't just land me a better job, it rewired my relationship with failure. I started seeing obstacles as gym equipment for the soul, each one sculpting a stronger version of myself. Now apply this to your life. That argument with your partner, it's a test of patience and communication. The financial strain, a crash course in resourcefulness. Even the daily irritations, the missed train, the rude barrister are micro exams in emotional agility. The Stoics didn't just endure these tests, they leaned into them. Musonius Rufus, exiled to a barren island, didn't lament his fate, he turned it into a laboratory for self-mastery, telling his students, "Hardship is the best teacher, for it refuses to let us remain as we are." Tonight, try this reframe. Write down one current struggle, then reimagine it as a cosmic pop quiz. If this is a test, what's it testing? My courage, my adaptability, my ability to set boundaries. Suddenly, the weight lifts. You're no longer powerless, you're participating. Like a warrior handed a sword instead of a wound, you start seeing obstacles not as punishments, but as invitations to level up. Because the Stoics knew a secret: the universe doesn't give tests you can't pass. It just waits to see how creatively you'll rise to meet them. Imagine walking into a crowded room where every eye turns to judge you, your clothes, your posture, your very presence. Now picture that room empty, the eyes gone, the silence complete. That's the mental shift Stoics engineered to break free from the prison of others' opinions. Epictetus, who endured the scorn of being a slave before becoming philosophy's most sought-after teacher, framed it bluntly. If someone told you that others spoke ill of you, would you fight with the words they spoke? No, you'd recognize that words are just sounds hitting air. This wasn't just theory, it was survival strategy. In a world where social status could mean life or death, Stoics discovered a radical truth. What others think of you is their business, not yours, and trying to control it is as futile as commanding the wind. Social anxiety, that modern plague of sweaty palms and racing thoughts before presentations or parties, thrives on one illusion, that we're the center of others' attention. Cognitive behavioral therapists call this the spotlight effect, where we overestimate how much people notice or judge us. The Stoics diagnosed it 2 millennia earlier. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling an empire, wrote in his private journal, "Stop worrying about what others say or do, only consider if your own actions are just." He wasn't dismissing social bonds, he was exposing the absurdity of letting strangers' potential whispers dictate your choices. Think of the last time you hesitated to dance at a wedding, ask a stupid question in class, or wear an outfit you loved but feared might draw stares. That hesitation wasn't instinct, it was conditioning. Here's the Stoic reframe: others' opinions are indifferent, not inherently good or bad, but neutral until you assign them meaning. That coworker's smirk when you present an idea, it could signal disdain or indigestion. The barrister's curt tone, maybe they're rude or grieving. Even if the judgment is real, so what? As Seneca wrote to a friend paralyzed by gossip, why do you care how many whisper about you when you can't even hear them all? The key isn't to become antisocial, it's to stop outsourcing your self-worth to external jurors. Ancient Stoics practiced this by wearing simple tunics in Rome's fashion-obsessed streets or eating modest meals at lavish banquets. Their goal wasn't to provoke, but to prove they could withstand either praise or scorn without flinching. Modern life magnifies this challenge. Social media metrics, likes, shares, follower counts, are just digitized versions of the ancient mob's thumbs up or thumbs down. The difference: the Stoics didn't carry the crowd in their pockets. Try this experiment today. Post something authentic but potentially polarizing, a political view, an unconventional hobby, a photo without filters. Then sit with the discomfort. Notice how no earthquake follows. The world keeps turning. That's the muscle Stoicism strengthens, the ability to act from integrity rather than applause. Your challenge isn't to never feel the sting of criticism, it's to question its power over you. When social anxiety whispers, they'll think you're foolish. Respond with Seneca's dagger-sharp question: who's they? Name them. The vague, they crumbles under scrutiny. Your boss's opinion might matter for promotions, but the stranger on the subway, the internet troll. Even friends' judgments are just data, not verdicts. Epictetus advised, if you learn that someone is speaking ill of you, don't defend yourself. Say, they don't know my other faults, or they'd have mentioned those too. Humor disarms fear. So tonight, ask yourself, what would I do today if I truly didn't care what others thought? Not in rebellion, but in liberation. Would you finally launch that podcast? Sing karaoke off-key, end the toxic relationship you stayed in for appearances. The Stoics didn't achieve indifference by numbing themselves. They woke up to the reality that most opinions are ghosts. And you're the one who gives them flesh. Strip that away, and what remains is something far more potent, a life lived on your own terms. Your hands are holding this device right now, but where is your mind? Drifting through yesterday's regrets, fretting over tomorrow's uncertainties, anywhere but here. Epictetus, the philosopher who turned his enslavement into a masterclass on freedom, gave a deceptively simple command: stick with the present, not as passive resignation, but as active engagement with the only moment you can truly shape. Modern neuroscience confirms what the Stoics intuited. Our brains default to time travel. spending nearly 50% of waking hours lost in mental reruns or rehearsals. That autopilot comes at a cost. Every second spent reliving or preliving is a withdrawal from your finite account of now. Consider the last time you ate a meal without tasting it, scrolling through screens while chewing mechanically. Or drove home on autopilot, arriving with no memory of the journey. These aren't just lapses in attention, they're leaks in your lived experience, the Stoic antidote. Sensory anchoring. Try this exercise as you read. Pause and name 5 sounds around you: the hum of appliances, distant traffic, your own breath. Notice 4 textures: fabric against skin, the weight of your device, air on your face. This isn't mindfulness jargon, it's battlefield tactics for a mind under siege by distractions. Marcus Aurelius practiced it on the front lines of war, writing, "Concentrate every minute on doing what's in front of you with precise and genuine seriousness." Not later, not when conditions are perfect. Now. The present moment isn't some abstract concept, it's the only place action exists. Anxiety about an upcoming meeting lives in the future. Shame over a past mistake dwells in history. But the breath you're taking, the decision to focus, that's happening here. Epictetus used a vivid metaphor. Life is like a banquet, and dwelling on past or future is like refusing to eat the dish in front of you while longing for one's already consumed or yet to come. Modern psychology calls this flow, the state where time dissolves because you're wholly immersed in doing. The athlete sinking a three-pointer, the artist lost in a canvas, the parent fully present with a laughing child. These are all living expressions of Stoic presence. Yet here's the paradox: being present doesn't mean ignoring the past or future. It means consulting them as reference libraries, not dwelling places. When Seneca advised, set aside certain days to eat only the plainest food and wear coarse clothes, he wasn't advocating perpetual austerity. He was creating controlled encounters with the present to appreciate ordinary moments more deeply. Your challenge isn't to erase planning or reflection, but to notice when you've moved from using time to being used by it. That tension in your shoulders while replaying an argument. Time travel, the pit in your stomach imagining worst-case scenarios. Time travel. Tonight, try Epictetus' stick test. Hold a pen and focus solely on its weight, texture, and color for 30 seconds. When your mind wanders, it will gently return to the pen. That simple act repeated trains what neuroscientists call attention muscle. Like a Roman sentry guarding the gates of perception, you're learning to spot mental intrusions before they hijack your peace. Present moment won't always be comfortable. It might hold sharp edges of grief or uncertainty, but it's the only territory where you can plant your feet and say, "Here. Now this is where I choose to stand," because the past is a ghost, the future a mirage, and the present, the only ground solid enough to bear your weight. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who turned exile into a classroom, stood before his students with a radical proposition. How could the mind be healthy if the body is weak? In an era when philosophers often dismissed physicality as a distraction from pure thought, Rufus insisted that neglect of the body wasn't asceticism, it was arrogance. Picture him demonstrating this principle by laboring alongside his students in the gardens of his barren island prison, his tunic streaked with sweat, hands calloused from tilling rocky soil. This wasn't just manual labor, it was philosophy in motion. He argued that physical endurance and mental resilience were twin strands of the same rope. One couldn't bear weight without the other. While modern gyms buzz with talk of gains and aesthetics, Rufus would have measured progress differently, not in kilos lifted but in willpower fortified. Consider the modern paradox. We've never had more fitness technology, smart watches tracking every step, apps optimizing every rep, yet we've never been more disconnected from the Stoic view of movement as moral training. When you drag yourself out of bed for a dawn run despite the rain, you're not just building cardiovascular endurance, you're rehearsing the ability to show up when life demands uncomfortable effort. That muscle burned during the last set of squats, it's the same discipline required to hold your tongue in a heated argument or persist through a tedious work project. Rufus saw the body as a forge where character is hammered into shape, writing, "Just as we must train the soul to resist the allure of pleasure, we must train the limbs to endure hardship." The sweat on your brow and the steadiness of your focus are chapters of the same story. History's greatest thinkers understood this synergy. The Roman gladiator turned philosopher-physician Galen prescribed vigorous ball games to sharpen the mind, while Leonardo da Vinci, who dissected corpses to understand human mechanics, declared, "Iron rusts from disuse, stagnant water loses its purity." Even so does inaction sap the vigor of the mind. Modern science confirms their intuition. Aerobic exercise stimulates BDNF, a protein that acts like fertilizer for brain cells, while resistance training reduces cortisol, the stress hormone that clouds judgment. But the Stoics would argue these biochemical benefits are secondary to the psychological metamorphosis that occurs when you move with purpose. Every time you choose the stairs over the elevator or opt for a walk instead of a scroll, you're casting a vote for self-mastery. Here's the challenge Rufus might issue today. Don't just exercise, interrogate it. Next time you're on a hike, notice how navigating uneven terrain demands present moment awareness, pulling you from rumination into sensation. When holding a yoga pose, test your patience. Observe how the mind's chatter mirrors its resistance to life's discomforts. Even household chores become Stoic drills if approached with intention. Scrubbing a pot until it shines trains the same attention to detail as proofreading an important email. The goal isn't to punish the body into submission, but to align it with the mind's highest intentions. As Rufus taught, a philosopher's body should be well prepared for physical activity, for often the virtues make use of this as a necessary tool. Tonight, reflect on this interplay. Did your morning workout make afternoon decisions crisper? Has post-run clarity ever untangled a problem desk-bound thinking couldn't solve? The Stoics didn't distinguish between mental and physical discipline. They saw them as currents in the same river, flowing toward the sea of wisdom. So tomorrow, when you lace up your shoes or unroll your mat, remember, you're not just building a better body. You're crafting a mind that knows how to endure, focus, and rise. Seneca once watched a wealthy Roman noble devour an entire roasted peacock in one sitting, a dish so extravagant its feathers were reattached for presentation, only to vomit moments later from overindulgence. This spectacle became the perfect metaphor for his teaching on delayed gratification. Pleasure, when unregulated, becomes its own punishment. He wasn't advocating austerity, but something far more subversive, the power of inserting a deliberate pause between desire and consumption. Picture standing in the checkout line with a bag of chips calling your name, or hovering over the Buy Now button for that shiny gadget you don't need. That moment of tension when craving clashes with willpower is where Stoic strength is forged. Modern neuroscience reveals what Seneca intuited. Our brains are wired with a pleasure-seeking shortcut called the mesolimbic pathway, which floods us with dopamine at the mere anticipation of reward. That's why scrolling through a food delivery app can feel as satisfying as eating, or why online shopping carts give a high before the item even arrives. The Stoic intervention interrupts that loop with what psychologists now call implementation pauses. When temptation strikes, institute a mandatory 10-minute wait, whether for a sugary snack or an Amazon splurge. Use that interval to ask Seneca's razor-sharp question: is this pleasure serving me or enslaving me? Ancient Romans didn't have Mori machines, but they recognized that unchecked desires shrink our freedom like a chain around the neck. Consider the marshmallow test Stoic twist. In the famous Stanford experiment, children who resisted eating one treat immediately were rewarded with two later. But Stoicism adds a deeper layer. It's not just about getting more later, but reclaiming agency now. When you delay scrolling social media for 15 minutes to finish meaningful work, you're not just optimizing productivity, you're proving to yourself that impulses don't dictate your actions. Epictetus, who began life as a slave, framed mastery over desires as the ultimate liberation. No man is free who is not master of himself. Your ability to pause before pleasure isn't self-denial, it's self-ownership. Here's how to make this tangible today. Pick one habitual indulgence, maybe that afternoon soda or the automatic Instagram scroll during downtime. Before engaging, insert a 5-minute buffer. During that window, conduct a cost-benefit autopsy. That soda, it'll give a sugar rush but may lead to an energy crash. The scrolling, it offers micro-distractions but fragments focus. The goal isn't to eliminate joy but to choose it consciously. Seneca ate fine meals and enjoyed comforts but on his terms. I may possess riches but they will not possess me. The magic happens in the gap between urge and action. Like a photographer adjusting the focus ring, that pause sharpens your vision of what truly satisfies. Tonight, when you reach for the TV remote or the dessert menu, freeze. Ask, would I still want this if I had to wait an hour for it? The answer will reveal whether you're chasing pleasure or fleeing discomfort. Because as Seneca discovered, the richest lives aren't those that gorge on every craving, but those that savor the few pleasures worthy of their time and their soul. Imagine two circles drawn on a piece of paper, one small, nestled inside a larger one. The inner circle represents what you can directly control, your thoughts, your actions, your reactions. The outer ring, everything else, the weather, traffic, other people's opinions. This is the Stoic adaptation of Stephen Covey's circle of influence, and it's not just a diagram, it's a battle plan for reclaiming your mental energy. The ancient Stoics didn't have whiteboards, but they understood this principle viscerally. Epictetus, who was born in chains, put it plainly: some things are up to us and some are not. That tiny inner circle, that's where freedom lives. Let's make this practical. Think about a recent frustration, maybe a delayed flight or a friend who cancelled plans last minute. Now grab that mental pen and start sorting. The airline's operations, outer circle; your packing choices, inner circle; your friend's reliability, outer circle; your decision to either resent them or adapt, inner circle. This sorting isn't about passive acceptance, it's strategic focus. Like an archer who controls their aim but not the wind, you pour energy into the pull of the bowstring, not the gusts that might deflect the arrow. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire he couldn't fully control, wrote, "The cucumber is bitter, then throw it away. There are brambles in the path, then go around." You don't need to say, why do these things exist? His point wasn't to ignore obstacles, but to stop wasting breath on unanswerable questions. Here's where most people get stuck: the gray zone, things that feel personal but aren't truly yours to fix. That coworker who takes credit for your ideas, their ethics are outer circle. How you document your contributions, inner circle. A parent's chronic disapproval. Their expectations are outer circle. Your boundaries around those conversations, inner circle. The Stoics called this gray zone the discipline of desire, recognizing that craving control over externals is like trying to lasso the moon. Try this exercise today. List 3 current worries, then draw your circles. For each, ask, what percentage of this is truly mine to influence? If it's less than 50, redirect that effort inward. The weather ruining your picnic, outer circle, but choosing to laugh and play board games instead. That's inner circle gold. The magic happens when you realize how much power was hiding in plain sight. Not to change the world, but to change your relationship to it. This practice reveals a liberating truth. Anxiety shrinks as your inner circle expands. Every time you trade, why won't they, for what can I, you're not just solving problems, you're rewiring your brain's control pathways. As Seneca wrote, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Those outer circle worries are often just shadow puppets on the wall of your mind. Stop chasing shadows. Tend your circle, watch what grows. There's a world of difference between the modern "I'm sorry you feel that way" and the Stoic apology. One is a verbal bandage slapped over a wound, the other is surgical precision aimed at healing. The Stoics approached apologies with the same clarity they brought to every aspect of life, not as performances of guilt but as acts of restoration. Picture Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in Rome, writing in his private journal, "If you've done wrong, grieve for that, not for the consequences you might suffer." That's the heart of Stoic remorse, focusing not on how your actions made you look, but on how they impacted others. A true Stoic apology follows three unshakable principles. First, specificity, no vague, "for whatever I did, dodges." Epictetus, who endured slavery before teaching emperors, would have dismissed such non-apologies as smoke without fire. Instead, name the act. "I interrupted you repeatedly in yesterday's meeting." Second, ownership, no passive voice or hidden caveats. Contrast, mistakes were made, with Seneca's approach. "When I spoke harshly to you, I failed my own standards." Third, amendment, not promises to try better, but concrete steps. When Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism, publicly misspoke about a student, he didn't just apologize, he changed his teaching methods to prevent repetition. Modern apologies often swing between two extremes: self-flagellation, "I'm the worst friend ever," or blame shifting, "I snapped because you were late." The Stoics rejected both as equally selfish. Excessive guilt makes the apology about your feelings, while deflection denies moral agency altogether. Imagine breaking a friend's vase. The narcissist wails, "I'm so clumsy, I hate myself." The blame shifter snaps, "You shouldn't have put it there." The Stoic, "I wasn't careful with your belongings. I'll replace it by Friday, and from now on I'll keep my bag away from fragile items." No drama, no loopholes, just responsibility and repair. Here's how to practice this today. Think of an unresolved tension in your life, maybe that text you left unanswered for days, or the sharp tone you used with a colleague. Draft an apology using the Stoic triad: observation, "When I cancelled last minute, I disrupted your plans." Principle, "That contradicted my value of reliability." Action, "Next time, I'll confirm or decline within 2 hours." Notice what's missing: justifications. The weather, your workload, their past behavior. None belong in the apology itself. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike the one who wronged you." The best apology, to prove through action that the wrong won't recur. This approach transforms apologies from transactions into transformations. A child watching a parent say, "I yelled because I was tired. That's no excuse, and next time I'll take a breath first," learns more about integrity than any lecture could teach. A team that hears, "My rushed feedback hurt your morale, I'll schedule proper reviews from now on," gains trust instead of resentment. The Stoics knew what modern psychology confirms. Clear accountability paradoxically strengthens relationships while evasion erodes them. So tonight, ask the question Seneca posed to his students: is there an unpaid debt of honor in my life? Not a groveling confession, but a concise acknowledgement that bridges the gap between who you are and who you aspire to be. Because a Stoic apology isn't about staining yourself with guilt, it's about polishing your character until it reflects your highest principles. There's a reason children learn languages faster than adults, not because their brains are sharper, but because they haven't yet learned to fear mistakes. They stumble over words, mispronounce phrases, and laugh it off, while adults freeze at the thought of imperfect conjugation. This is the essence of the beginner's mind, a Stoic practice that transforms obstacles into playgrounds for curiosity. Imagine a seasoned programmer staring at a blank screen, paralyzed by the pressure to write flawless code, while across the room a first-time coder dives in, thrilled by each error message because it's a clue leading them closer to understanding. The Stoics didn't just tolerate being beginners, they embraced it as a superpower. Epictetus, who taught philosophy to Rome's elite, reminded his students, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish. Not as a humiliation, but as liberation. Approaching challenges with fresh eyes isn't about ignoring experience, it's about temporarily setting aside the weight of knowing better to rediscover wonder. Consider the Roman architect Vitruvius, who studied crumbling buildings not with the arrogance of an expert, but with the humility of a detective. His sketches of failed structures became the foundation for earthquake-resistant designs. The Stoics called this apatheia not apathy, but clear-eyed detachment from ego. When you're learning a new skill, like baking sourdough or speaking Mandarin, that moment when the loaf collapses or your tones sound absurd isn't failure, it's data. Marcus Aurelius kept this mindset even as emperor, writing, "Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall meet interference, ingratitude, insolence. But I cannot be angry with my kin, for we are made for cooperation." Even rulers, he realized, must remain perpetual students of human nature. Here's the experiment. Pick one area where you felt stagnant, maybe guitar chords that never sound clean, or a leadership style that feels rigid. Now for 30 minutes, deliberately adopt the posture of a first-day learner. If you're a manager, ask your team, what's one thing I could do differently? And listen without defending. If you're an artist, try sketching with your non-dominant hand to bypass the critic in your head. The goal isn't to erase hard-won skills, but to create a pocket of space where curiosity crowds out self-judgment. Like a gardener pruning a rose bush, sometimes you need to cut back the overgrowth of expertise to make room for new blooms. The beginner's mind thrives on what psychologists call productive discomfort, that sweet spot where challenge and engagement intersect. Think of Seneca returning to his writing desk each morning as if he'd never held a quill, or the Stoic farmer Musonius Rufus tilling soil alongside his students despite decades of knowledge. Their mastery didn't come from avoiding amateurhood, but from revisiting it willingly. Modern research confirms this. Nobel Prize winners who dabble in hobbies outside their field are 8 times more likely to make breakthroughs. Why? Because painting watercolors or playing chess forces their brains out of well-worn ruts. Your challenge today isn't to become a novice again, it's to borrow their goggles. When you next face a stubborn problem, ask, how would someone seeing this for the first time tackle it? Not with your baggage of past attempts, but with the wide-eyed optimism of someone who doesn't yet know what's impossible. The Roman engineer who invented concrete did so by questioning why volcanic ash made sand harder, not dismissing it as a fluke. The Stoics didn't worship inexperience, they revered its gift of unfiltered perception. So tonight, as you set down your tools, whether they're spreadsheets or paintbrushes, leave room for one beginner's question. What if I've been missing something obvious all along? The answer might just be the door to your next leap forward. Cato the Younger once stood before the Roman Senate, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade through silk, refusing to bend to Julius Caesar's demands even as others scrambled to appease the rising dictator. This wasn't stubbornness, it was Stoic boundary setting in its purest form. The Stoics didn't see no as a negative word. They saw it as a sacred act of alignment, a way to carve out space for what truly mattered. Imagine a modern-day Cato in a corporate meeting, calmly declining to work weekends despite peer pressure, or a parent turning down a social invite to protect family time. Their refusal isn't rude, it's revolutionary, because every no whispered with conviction is a yes roared to something deeper, your integrity, your peace, your unchained soul. People-pleasing, that modern epidemic of swallowed boundaries and half-hearted yeses, would have baffled the Stoics. They understood a corrosive truth. When you chronically prioritize others' comfort over your own values, you're not being kind, you're being dishonest. Epictetus, who endured slavery before teaching emperors, framed it bluntly: if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish or unkind. That's the razor's edge of the Stoic no. It risks temporary disapproval to safeguard lasting self-respect. Think of the last time you agreed to take on extra work while resentment simmered beneath your smile, or said, of course, to a favor that drained your energy. Those weren't acts of generosity, they were withdrawals from your moral bank account. Here's where Stoic boundary setting diverges from modern self-help cliches. It's not about aggressive assertiveness or crafting the perfect rejection script. It's about preemptive clarity, knowing your hell yes boundaries so deeply that no becomes instinctual when they're tested. Marcus Aurelius wrote his principles down each morning not as vague ideals but as filters for decisions. If it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it. Picture a firefighter's uncompromising no to entering a burning building without gear. That's the Stoic stance. Your time, your energy, your moral compass, these are your oxygen mask. You don't apologize for securing them first. Consider the entrepreneur who turns down a lucrative deal with an unethical client, or the friend who declines to gossip despite the awkward silence that follows. Their refusals aren't rejections of others, but affirmations of themselves. Cotto didn't say no to Caesar because he hated power. He said no because he loved liberty more. This is the litmus test for your own boundaries. Does this, yes, dilute my core values? That committee seat that sounds prestigious but drains your creative time. The toxic relationship you keep excusing, even the harmless scroll through social media when you vowed to write. Each unspoken no is a silent surrender of sovereignty. Tonight, try this recalibration exercise. List 3 current yeses that feel out of alignment, perhaps overcommitments, tolerations, or quiet resentments. Next to each, write the no you've been avoiding, then the value that no would protect. No, I can't host Thanksgiving this year, guards my need for rest. No, I won't cover for my co-worker's chronic lateness, honors my fairness. The Stoics knew that boundaries aren't walls, they're the trellises that let your highest self grow upright. As Seneca wrote, we must say what we feel and feel what we say, because a life of hollow yeses isn't pleasing, it's slowly disappearing. Marcus Aurelius never met a modern athlete, but he would have recognized the fire in Wilma Rudolph's eyes when doctors told her she'd never walk again, let alone sprint. Stricken with polio as a child, her left leg twisted and weak, she spent years in a metal brace staring at other children running through Tennessee fields. Yet every shuffle down her hallway, every painful stretch of atrophied muscles, became proof of the Stoic truth she didn't yet know by name. What stands in the way becomes the way. A decade later, she wasn't just walking, she was blazing past competitors to become the first American woman to win 3 gold medals in a single Olympics. That limp, it taught her biomechanics most runners never notice. Those lonely hours in rehabilitation, they forged a focus that left rivals trembling at the starting block. The obstacle didn't just shape her path, it became the path. Consider how this plays out in ordinary lives. That job rejection that forced you to freelance. It revealed entrepreneurial muscles a steady paycheck would have left flabby. The relationship that ended in heartbreak, it rewired your discernment for future love. Even minor inconveniences, the missed train that led to a conversation with a stranger who became a mentor, the broken laptop that revived your handwriting, are life's way of rerouting us toward unseen gifts. The Stoics didn't just endure setbacks, they dissected them like engineers reverse engineering a rival's invention, asking, what hidden advantage does this force upon me? When Roman general Gaius Marius was denied a prestigious military post, he didn't sulk. He used the downtime to study guerrilla tactics that later made him unbeatable. The rejection wasn't a stop sign, it was a detour sign pointing toward uncharted strengths. take a moment to excavate your own history. That period you've labeled as a low point, what skills did it incubate? Maybe getting passed over for promotion taught you to measure success beyond titles, or a health scare became the catalyst for mindfulness practices that deepened every relationship. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth, but Marcus Aurelius framed it more viscerally. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The key isn't to pretend adversity feels good, but to recognize that, like a relentless coach, it often pushes us further than comfort ever could. Wilma Rudolph's polio didn't disappear when she stepped onto the Olympic podium. It transformed into the relentless drive that made her unstoppable. Your obstacles, too, carry that alchemical potential, not in spite of their weight, but because of it. So tonight, flip the script on one past struggle. Ask not, why did this happen to me, but what did this happen for me? The answer might reveal that the very barrier you cursed was the foundation you've been standing on all along. The hour before sleep isn't just downtime, it's sacred ground for the Stoics, a space where the day's chaos gets sifted through the sieve of reason. Picture Seneca in his lamplit study, parchment unrolled as he performed what he called his evening audit, not to tally accomplishments like some ancient productivity hack, but to gently untangle the knots of the day's impressions. We should take wandering thoughts into custody the moment they arise, he wrote, comparing an unexamined mind to a ship adrift in stormy seas. His ritual wasn't about replaying events like a courtroom drama, but about separating what served his principles from what merely stirred his emotions. Consider how most of us collapse into bed screens flooding our retinas with artificial light, unresolved arguments looping in our minds, tomorrow's to-do list already gnawing at our peace. The Stoic alternative, a deliberate deceleration. Imagine closing your eyes and revisiting the day in reverse, not to judge but to witness. That tense meeting where your voice stayed steady despite the rising pressure. Note it, the moment you chose patience with your child's tantrum instead of matching their volume. Honor it. Even the small victories, the deep breath taken before responding to a snippy email, the healthy meal prepped instead of ordering greasy takeout, these are the threads of character woven through ordinary moments. Seneca's letters reveal a surprising tenderness in this practice. He advised Lucilius to ask yourself at bedtime, what ailment have I cured today? What temptation resisted? Not to flaunt moral superiority, but to spot patterns. Did irritation flare when traffic stalled? That's data, not failure. Did generosity flow when a coworker struggled? That's a muscle to strengthen. The goal isn't self-scoring, but aligning actions with values like a gardener, pruning only what obscures the plant's natural shape. Tonight, try this 3-step Stoic sleep ritual. First, light a candle or dim the lights, a sensory signal to your brain that evaluation, not rumination, begins now. Second, name 3 specific actions that aligned with your ideals today. Not vague, I was kind, but precise. I listened fully when my partner vented about work without interrupting. Third, identify one moment where autopilot overrode intention. Not to berate yourself, but to spot the gap between instinct and principle. Maybe you snapped at the barista over a delayed coffee, or refreshed your inbox compulsively instead of starting that creative project. The key, frame it as Seneca would. Tomorrow, I'll place my phone across the room until noon, or I'll pack a snack so hunger doesn't hijack my patience. This isn't journaling for its own sake, it's cognitive hygiene. Studies show that writing down unresolved thoughts before bed reduces cortisol spikes, while naming positive experiences boosts serotonin. The Stoics were early architects of what neuroscientists now call targeted memory reactivation, where consciously reviewing learning before sleep strengthens neural pathways. But beyond science, there's soul in this practice. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts," he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He knew nighttime reflection shapes tomorrow's character. So tonight, as you turn off the lamps and let the darkness cradle you, don't just rehash the day's script. Edit it with the gentle precision of a poet, keeping what sings, revising what stumbles, and trusting that each small adjustment is another brick in the unshakable inner citadel the Stoics spent lifetimes building. Because the best sleep doesn't come from exhaustion, it comes from knowing you've met the day with eyes wide open, and tomorrow you'll do it again, wiser for having looked. Consider a storm rolling across a field, how the tallest trees bend without breaking, how the river swells but doesn't resent the rain, how the earth drinks the deluge without complaint. Nature doesn't resist change, it collaborates with it. The Stoics saw in this a masterclass in equanimity. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the logos, the rational principle governing the universe, noting how seamlessly winter yields to spring, how decay fertilizes new growth. He wrote, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs." That's the heart of this practice, not passive resignation, but active harmony with life's inevitable ebbs and flows. Think of a gardener preparing soil. She doesn't curse the rocks or drought, she works with them. Tough clay becomes an opportunity to plant deep-rooted perennials. Scorching sun dictates the timing of watering. Even pests teach her which plants thrive with minimal interference. This is Stoic acceptance in action, seeing conditions not as obstacles, but as parameters for creative adaptation. When Epictetus said, "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do," he wasn't advocating surrender, he was pointing to the liberating power of aligning effort with reality. Now translate this to your own storms. That sudden job lost, could it be the universe clearing space for a path you'd been too cautious to choose? The argument that left you raw, might it reveal where your boundaries need reinforcing, like a tree growing thicker bark where the wind bites hardest? Nature doesn't waste energy raging against what is. It invests in resilience. A forest fire, devastating in the moment, unlocks seeds that have waited decades for heat to sprout. Your challenges, too, carry dormant potentials. Try this exercise for 1 week. Track how you respond to disruptions. A cancelled plan, a harsh critique, even a stubbed toe. Note each reaction, then ask, how would a river respond to a boulder? It doesn't stop flowing, it finds another way. The oak doesn't resent the acorn's slow growth. The rose doesn't compare its thorns to the lily's smooth stem. They simply occupy their place in the ecosystem with unshakable presence, the deeper lesson. Trust the seasons of your life. Winter's barrenness prepares the soil for spring's explosion of color. The scorching heat of summer tests roots before autumn's harvest. When you feel stuck or battered, remember, even the longest storm eventually runs out of rain, and when it passes, you'll find, like the meadow after a downpour, that you've been quietly gathering strength all along. Ancient Roman Stoics carried small amulets, coins, or carved stones tucked in their tunics, not as superstitious charms, but as tactile reminders of their philosophy. When anxiety spiked or anger flared, their fingers would find these objects, turning them over like worry stones, each groove and edge whispering a silent lesson: this too shall pass. What's within my control, Amor Fati? Marcus Aurelius himself likely carried a coin engraved with the image of his mentor, Rusticus, not to worship the man, but to reconnect with the virtues he embodied. This is the essence of the Stoic Handshake, a physical anchor to reel your mind back from chaos's edge. Your version doesn't need to be ancient or ornate. Picture a commuter gripping their keychain during a tense subway delay, feeling the ridges of their apartment key and remembering, I control my reaction, not the train's schedule. Or a CEO rolling a smooth stone in their palm before a high-stakes negotiation, its cool surface muting the buzz of ego and fear. The power lies in the pairing, a physical sensation tied to a mental reset. Modern neuroscience explains why this works. Tactile stimuli activate the somatosensory cortex, disrupting the amygdala's panic loop. The Stoics didn't have fMRI machines, but they knew what we've forgotten. The body can reboot the mind. Consider the story of Cleans, Zeno's successor, who worked as a water carrier by night to fund his philosophy studies. He'd press a single olive pit into his palm during backbreaking labor, using its hardness to remind himself discomfort is the price of growth. That pit wasn't magic, it was a metronome for his thoughts, syncing them to a rhythm of resilience. Today, your olive pit might be the wedding band you twist when stress blurs your patience, or the textured phone case you grip before sending a difficult message. The object matters less than the intention you weld to it. Here's how to forge your own Stoic handshake. First, choose an item you already interact with daily: a pen, a watch, even your own thumb ring. Next, assign it a Stoic prompt. A nurse might tap her stethoscope twice before entering a patient's room, silently affirming, "Meet this suffering with compassion." A parent could trace the braille-like bumps of their car's steering wheel before school drop-off, recalling, "Today I model calm." The key is consistency. Like a muscle memory drill, the physical act must become inseparable from the mental pivot. Historians have found amulets in Roman ruins inscribed with phrases like "tranquillitas" or "memento mori," but yours need no engraving. A gym regular might chalk their hands before deadlifts, using the gritty texture as a cue. "This weight, like life's burdens, strengthens me." A writer could keep a worry stone by their keyboard, its weight in their palm a reminder. The obstacle is the draft. Even something as mundane as a water bottle becomes sacred when lifting it whispers, "Care for this vessel, it carries your purpose." The invitation isn't to adopt someone else's ritual, but to listen for where your life already offers textures waiting to be charged with meaning. That loose button on your coat you absent-mindedly fiddle with. It could become a Stoic knot, each twist unraveling distractions, the scar on your knee from childhood, a tactile map back to resilience. As Epictetus taught, no great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me you desire a fig, I answer that there must be time. Your Stoic handshake, too, will ripen with repetition until one day, reaching for that coin or key isn't a choice but a homecoming. Imagine Vincent van Gogh holding one of his rejected paintings, the swirling stars and bold yellows that galleries called clumsy and garish. Now picture him with two baskets, one labeled "Changes my art," the other "Changes nothing." This is the essence of the Stoic criticism filter, not a shield against feedback, but a sieve to separate the gravel from the gold. The Stoics didn't avoid critique, they mastered the art of triaging it. Marcus Aurelius, who faced constant scrutiny as emperor, wrote in his private journal, "It's ridiculous not to escape from your own vices, which is possible, while trying to escape the vices of others, which is impossible." That's the first question of the filter. Is this feedback about my work or about the critic's unresolved biases? Every creator knows the sting of rejection. J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter manuscript was dismissed by 12 publishers before one saw its magic. But here's what Stoicism adds to resilience. It's not about enduring criticism, it's about evaluating it with surgical precision. When a famous art dealer told Frida Kahlo her paintings were too raw, she didn't dismiss the comment outright. She placed it in the first basket, "Changes my art," then asked, "Does this align with my vision?" The answer was no. That critique wasn't about technique, it was about comfort zones. She kept painting unflinchingly autobiographical works, and history vindicated her choice. The Stoic filter forces this reckoning. Is the critic an expert in your field or just an expert in their preferences? Now apply this to everyday life. Your boss suggests restructuring your report. That's basket 1. The coworker who mumbles, "I just don't like your style." Basket 2. Even loved ones' opinions need filtering. When Seneca's students fretted over family disapproval of their philosophical pursuits, he advised, "Who is judging someone living by principle or by habit?" Not all criticism is created equal. The harshest words from a trusted mentor may be gold dust. The mildest jab from a perpetual skeptic is just dust. Here's the litmus test. Critique that specifies how to improve belongs in basket 1. Your pacing drags in Act 2 invites revision. I don't get it without elaboration. Basket 2. Epictetus, who endured ridicule as a disabled former slave, gave a razor-sharp rule. If someone offers you criticism and can't point to the Stoic virtues, you've violated wisdom, justice, courage, or temperance. Their words are wind. Your challenge today isn't to grow thicker skin, it's to build better filters. Take one recent critique, from a Yelp review to a performance evaluation, and hold it up to the Stoic sieve. Does the critic understand your goals? Have they earned the right to be heard? Would acting on this make you more aligned with your values or just more palatable to them? Van Gogh died without commercial success, but he left us a compass. If you hear a voice within you say you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced. The Stoics would add, but first check whose voice it really is, because the unexamined critique isn't worth internalizing, and the examined one, it might just be the chisel that reveals your masterpiece. Heraclitus stood by the river's edge 25 centuries ago, watching the current carry away leaves and branches when he spoke those now immortal words, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." The water changes, the banks shift, and even the traveler is transformed by the journey. The Stoics seized on this observation as more than poetry. It became their operating system for life. Imagine your existence as a pilgrimage where every bend in the road demands lighter packing. What emotional clutter have you been dragging behind you like a cracked suitcase? Grudges from old betrayals, fears of past failures, the weight of expectations that no longer fit who you're becoming. The Stoic traveler knows to move freely through life's currents, you must regularly empty your hands. Consider the ancient merchants who plied the Silk Road. They didn't haul every trinket they'd ever acquired across deserts and mountains. They traded heavy cargo for what served the next leg of the journey. Your mind, too, has its own caravan stops where you can barter outdated beliefs for newfound clarity. That resentment toward a former friend, its excess weight slowing your pace. The imposter syndrome whispering, "You're not ready," a stone in your shoe left over from yesterday's path. Marcus Aurelius, who spent years on military campaigns, wrote in his saddlebag journal, "Throw out your conceited opinions, for it's impossible for anyone to begin learning what he thinks he already knows." Every mile demands surrender, not of your core values, but of the mental junk that obscures them. Modern life disguises stagnation as motion. We scroll through endless feeds, mistaking digital drift for progress, or cling to routines that stopped serving us years ago, like travelers pitching tents in a ghost town. The Stoic remedy: regular waypoint checks. Picture yourself at a crossroads with two questions. What served me in the past but no longer fits? And what am I carrying for someone else's journey, not my own? That college degree you never use isn't a failure, it's a bridge that brought you here, now ready to be left behind. The approval seeking that once protected you in a chaotic household. Time to unshoulder that burden. Even successes can become baggage if we let them define us too tightly. The athlete who clings to their championship glory risks missing the wisdom of their later years. History's great travelers, real and metaphorical, mastered this art. Ibn Battuta, the 14th century explorer who logged 75,000 miles across Africa and Asia, didn't document landscapes alone, he recorded how each encounter changed him. The Buddha left his palace privileges behind to walk dusty roads as a seeker. Eleanor Roosevelt transformed her grief and insecurity into a compass that guided a nation. Their secret wasn't indifference, it was discernment about what deserved a permanent place in their packs. Here's your invitation. Tonight, unpack one piece of mental luggage. Maybe it's the shame over that career misstep 5 years ago, still folded neatly in your mind like a worn shirt you never wear but can't discard, or the fantasy that someday, you'll finally feel ready to begin your dream project. Hold it up to the light of Heraclitus River. Does this still serve who I am becoming? If not, place it gently on the bank and walk on. The water ahead has new reflections to show you, but only if your hands are open enough to catch them. The Stoic traveler's wisdom lies in knowing that rivers don't flow backward, and neither should you. What made you strong at 20 may weaken you at 40 if you refuse to evolve. As Seneca wrote while journeying to exile, every new place demands a new self, not because the old you was wrong, but because the river has carried you beyond where that version could swim. So lighten your load. The current can't steer a ship anchored to yesterday's wreckage, but a vessel trimmed just right, that one rides the waves like it was born to them. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in his private journal, "Very little is needed to make a happy life." He wasn't advocating for empty rooms or barren shelves. He was pointing to something far more radical, the freedom that comes when possessions stop possessing you. Picture your grandmother's china cabinet collecting dust, the treadmill doubling as a clothes rack, the boxes of forgotten hobbies crowding your attic. Each one isn't just taking up physical space, it's leasing mental real estate, demanding silent energy for upkeep, guilt, or the weight of unmet expectations. The Stoics didn't practice minimalism as an aesthetic trend. They wielded it like a scalpel, cutting away everything that didn't serve virtue or peace. Modern minimalism often gets reduced to Instagram-worthy white walls and capsule wardrobes, but the Stoic approach runs deeper. It's about interrogating every object in your life with one brutal question: does this burden or benefit my purpose? When Epictetus advised, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants, he was highlighting the paradox of clutter. The more we own, the more we're owned by maintenance, comparison, and the fear of loss. Take that espresso machine you used twice. It's not just counter space it occupies, but mental bandwidth every time you glance at it and think, I should really. Here's the experiment today. Choose one drawer, shelf, or corner, any space you interact with daily. Before removing a single item, channel the Stoic pause. Hold each object and ask: 1. Does this actively support my current values, not the person I was or pretend to be? 2. If I lost this tomorrow, would I pay to replace it? 3. Does owning this align with my energy, not just my aspirations? A Roman senator's toga might seem worlds apart from your overstuffed closet, but the principle transcends time. Seneca, who could have bathed in gold but chose modest baths, wrote, "It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the one who craves more. That vintage typewriter you'll someday restore." The boxes of childhood mementos you haven't opened in a decade, they're not just things, they're decision fatigue in physical form. Minimalism, Stoic style, isn't about deprivation, it's about curation. The Japanese artisan who keeps only tools that spark joy isn't so far from Musonius Rufus tending his exile's garden with a single well-worn hoe. Both understand mastery requires focus, and focus demands space, both literal and mental. When you donate those unworn shoes or finally recycle the college textbooks, you're not losing memories. You're gaining room to breathe, create, and meet the present unburdened. Tonight, as you walk through your home, watch how your body reacts. That tense shrug passing the jammed garage, the sigh when you open the junk drawer. Those are your soul's way of whispering, let go, because the Stoic secret isn't owning nothing, it's owning nothing that owns you back. Epictetus spent his final years exiled to a windswept Greek island, far from the bustling Roman lecture halls where he'd taught philosophy. Yet when visitors arrived expecting to find a broken man, they were met with something startling: a smile. Not the hollow grin of denial, but the serene composure of someone who'd turned adversity into an ally. He'd say, if someone tried to take control of your body and hand you over to a passerby, you'd be outraged. Yet you hand over your mind to anyone who insults you, allowing your happiness to be shaken. That's the essence of the Stoic smile, not pretending hardship doesn't sting, but refusing to let it dictate your inner weather. Picture a modern parallel. You've just been called into your boss's office and handed a pink slip. The gut punch is real, your pulse races, your palms sweat. But then, as you pack your desk, you do something counterintuitive. You smile. Not because you're happy, but because you recognize this moment as a test of your principles. That smile becomes a silent declaration. This setback doesn't own my self-worth. Studies show the physical act of smiling, even when forced, triggers dopamine release, lowering stress hormones. The Stoics didn't know biochemistry, but they understood the power of embodied resilience. When Epictetus smiled in exile, he was performing the ultimate act of defiance, proof that no external event could corrode his inner freedom. History's most resilient figures mastered this alchemy. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison, yet emerged without bitterness, his smile disarming even his jailers. Viktor Frankl wrote of finding moments of dark humor in concentration camps, a psychological lifeline. These weren't masks of cheerfulness, they were shields against despair. The Stoic smile isn't about suppressing pain, it's about asserting agency over how pain shapes you. When a musician flubs a note on stage and grins instead of freezing, or a parent laughs through the chaos of a toddler's tantrum, they're channeling the same wisdom. This too shall pass, and I choose how I'll remember it. Try this today. The next time frustration flares a spilled coffee, a missed deadline, pause and physically relax your face. Notice how softening your brow and curving your lips slightly shifts your mental state. Ancient Stoics trained this reflex like athletes. During mock insults in philosophy schools, students practiced responding with calm amusement rather than outrage. Modern cognitive therapy echoes this with opposite action techniques, deliberately smiling when anxious to rewire neural pathways. The goal isn't to erase emotions, but to create space between stimulus and response. The deeper magic of the Stoic smile lies in its ripple effects. That colleague who snaps at you, meeting their irritation with quiet composure, often diffuses tension faster than confrontation. The cancelled flight that strands you overnight, a chuckle and a shrug might inspire a gate agent to upgrade your seat. As Marcus Aurelius observed, our anger and annoyance hurt us more than the things themselves that anger or annoy us. Your smile becomes a mirror showing others how little power circumstances truly hold, not just over you, but over them too. Tonight, reflect on one recent annoyance you met with scowls or sighs. Rewrite the scene in your mind, this time with the Stoic smile, not as surrender but as sovereignty. Notice how the weight shifts when you refuse to let life's friction grind you down. Because resilience isn't about avoiding storms, it's about learning to dance in the rain, face upturned, with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the sun still exists behind the clouds. And sometimes that dance begins with something as simple as choosing to smile. Stoicism often gets mislabeled as purely defensive, a philosophy of bracing for the worst while hoping for little. But the ancient Stoics understood something modern mindset coaches are just rediscovering. Preparing for success requires just as much training as preparing for setbacks. Enter the reverse clause, the often overlooked sibling of the Stoic reserve clause. While the reserve clause whispers, fate permitting, the reverse clause asks a daring question: what if this goes better than I imagine? Picture a startup founder nervously pitching investors, her mind rehearsing every possible objection. Now imagine her pausing to consider, what if they love it? What if this funding round triples our valuation? How will I steward that success without losing focus? That's the reverse clause in action. Not naive optimism, but strategic readiness for windfalls. History's greatest Stoic entrepreneurs practiced this balancing act. Take Zeno, the merchant-turned-philosopher whose shipwreck led him to Athens and ultimately to founding Stoicism. When his remaining cargo of purple dye, a luxury good in ancient Greece, sold for a fortune, he didn't squander it on chariots and feasts. He invested in philosophical education, turning personal success into communal wisdom. The reverse clause isn't about manifesting riches, it's about preparing your character to handle expansion without exploding. When a tech CEO suddenly lands $1 billion valuation, the real test isn't the boardroom, it's whether they've mentally rehearsed staying grounded amid the hype. Try this exercise today. Pick one endeavor where you typically default to worst-case planning: a job interview, a creative project, a difficult conversation. Now flip the script. Visualize not just competence but extraordinary reception. Your presentation earns a standing ovation. Your novel gets a six-figure advance. The person you're confronting thanks you for your honesty. Then ask the Stoic follow-up: how will I ensure this doesn't distort my values? When the Roman general Scipio Africanus returned victorious from Carthage, he refused triumphal parades, knowing unchecked acclaim could corrupt judgment. Your version might be simpler. Maybe it's a rule to wait 48 hours before making big decisions after any win, or a commitment to mentor others if your project takes off. The magic lies in the paradox. By imagining success with clear eyes, you disarm its potential to derail you. Modern psychology confirms this. Athletes who visualize podium finishes alongside post-victory routines perform better under pressure. The reverse clause turns Stoicism's famed caution into a compass for sustainable achievement, because the unexamined windfall can be just as dangerous as the unexpected blow. So tonight, as you plan tomorrow's challenges, don't just rehearse surviving failure. Practice deserving success, then staying worthy of it. Marcus Aurelius often pictured himself as two people: the emperor gripped by anger or anxiety, and the quiet observer watching those emotions from a distance. This mental split wasn't dissociation, it was mastery. He wrote in Meditations, "You are the little soul carrying the corpse," a stark reminder that our emotions are things we carry, not things we are. Modern psychology calls this metacognition, but the Stoics practiced it centuries ago: the art of witnessing your inner storms without drowning in them. Next time frustration flares when your hands clench over a rude email or your chest tightens before a difficult conversation, pause and say aloud, "I notice I'm feeling anger," instead of "I am angry." That subtle shift from identity to observation is the difference between being a prisoner of your emotions and the scientist studying them. Think of a geologist examining a volcano. She doesn't blame the magma for erupting or take its heat personally. She tracks its patterns, predicts its flow, and works around its dangers. Your emotions deserve the same clinical curiosity. When a partner's comment triggers defensiveness, instead of spiraling into "they always disrespect me," try narrating, "I notice my heart rate spiking and my jaw clenching. My body's interpreting this as a threat." This isn't suppression, it's strategic detachment. Epictetus, who endured slavery before teaching Stoicism, framed it as separating impressions from assent. The initial emotional surge, inevitable. The story you tell yourself about it, that's where your power lies. Here's the experiment for one day: label emotions like a botanist naming plants. This is anxiety, rapid breathing, tunnel vision, catastrophic thoughts. This is envy, heat in my cheeks, scrolling their social media obsessively. By depersonalizing the feeling, you drain its tyranny. Modern therapists use this exact technique with clients who suffer from panic attacks, teaching them to say, "My body is having a stress reaction," rather than "I'm dying." The Stoics would have recognized this instantly. When Marcus journaled about his temper, he didn't write, "I'm furious at my general's incompetence," he noted. The impression of anger arose during today's briefing. That slight remove gave him space to choose his response rather than being hijacked by reflex. But the Stoic witness isn't just about cool analysis, it's about reclaiming agency. Picture a courtroom where your emotions are testifying, not dictating the verdict. That rush of insecurity before a big presentation, let it take the stand. The witness claims I'll fail. Does the evidence support this? That gnawing guilt over saying no, cross-examine it. Is this feeling rooted in reality or old people-pleasing habits? Seneca practiced this daily, writing, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality. By observing emotions as separate events like weather passing through, you stop mistaking thunderstorms for the climate of your soul." Tonight, try this reframe. Recall one recent emotional spike, maybe road rage or jealousy, and replay it in third person. Marcus noticed his face growing hot when cut off in traffic. His grip tightened on the wheel as his mind rehearsed arguments. That tiny shift from "I was furious" to "the character felt fury" creates just enough space to spot patterns. Over time, you'll catch emotions earlier, like a sailor reading wind shifts before the storm hits, because the goal isn't to eliminate feelings, it's to stop letting them steer the ship. As Aurelius knew, even an emperor can't control the winds, but he can always adjust the sails. Picture two chess players locked in battle, one obsessively counting victories, the other studying each move for deeper patterns. The first sees chess as a finite game, win or lose, then reset. The second plays an infinite game where every match, whether won or lost, sharpens strategy for the next. This is the heart of Stoicism's most liberating paradox. Life isn't a tournament with trophies and exits, but an endless dojo where mastery lies in the practice itself. Seneca, nearing 80 and still scribbling philosophical letters to friends, embodied this when he wrote, "As long as I live, I'll never cease learning." Not because he lacked achievements, he'd been a senator, a playwright, Nero's advisor, but because he knew wisdom wasn't a destination, it was the road itself. Modern culture bombards us with finite games, quarterly targets, 5-year plans, bucket lists ticking off experiences like groceries. There's nothing wrong with these markers unless we mistake them for the point. The executive who collapses after hitting their revenue goal, the student adrift after graduation, the artist who quits when their work goes viral, all reveal the trap of finite play. Contrast this with the Stoic craftsman, whether a potter perfecting her glaze or a coder refining his algorithms. Their joy lies in the iteration, not the applause. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire yet wrote, "The fruit of this life is a good character and acts for the common good." Not conquest, not legacy, just daily becoming. Here's how to diagnose which game you're playing. Finite goals ask, "Did I win?" Infinite growth asks, "What did I learn?" A rejected manuscript devastates the finite writer. It's a loss. For the infinite writer, it's feedback to hone the next draft. The Stoics called this Procopton, the lifelong learner, always in progress. Think of Michelangelo chiseling the Piet at 23, then pushing into uncharted styles with The Last Judgment 60 years later. Or Serena Williams, who after 23 Grand Slam titles still studied footage of her own serves. Finite players retire at their peak. Infinite players redefine what peak means. The magic of the infinite game is its resilience. A finite player crumbles when their industry shifts. Think film photographers eclipsed by digital. An infinite photographer adapts, not because they must, but because curiosity compels them. When Seneca's enemies exiled him to Corsica, he didn't languish waiting for recall. He turned exile into a laboratory, studying local plants and writing tragedies. The island wasn't a prison, it was the next level. Tonight, audit your own scoreboard. That promotion you're chasing, is it a finish line or a gateway to new challenges? The marathon you trained for, will it gather dust with your medal or become the foundation for stronger runs? The Stoics didn't reject goals, they rechiseled them as waypoints, not endpoints. As you lay in bed, ask Seneca's question. What did I improve today, not for praise, but for the sake of better itself? Because infinite players share one secret: they fall in love with practice and let results become the afterthought. Every storm feels endless when you're in its grip: the pounding rain, the howling wind, the sense that the world has narrowed to this single point of struggle. That's when the Stoics would reach for their anchor, a short, potent phrase to tether them to reason when emotions threaten to sweep them away. Marcus Aurelius had his "What stands in the way becomes the way," whispered it to himself during sleepless nights planning military campaigns. Epictetus, the former slave-turned-philosopher, anchored himself with "It's not what happens, but how you interpret it," a lifeline when insults or hardships struck. These weren't platitudes, they were psychological grappling hooks designed to pull the thinker back from the edge of overwhelm. History's greatest survivors all had their anchors. Viktor Frankl, enduring Auschwitz, repeated Nietzsche's words like a chant: "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." The Stoic version, a simple reminder that even in suffering, meaning could be forged. Centuries earlier, the Persian poet Rumi crystallized the same idea in 4 words: "This too shall pass." What makes these phrases endure isn't their poetry, it's their precision. They don't deny pain, they reframe its temporariness. Imagine a nurse in a pandemic ward murmuring, "This is water," during a grueling shift, a nod to David Foster Wallace's insight that the hardest realities often look different when seen clearly. The magic of an anchor lies in its simplicity. Complex philosophies crumble under stress, but a single, well-worn sentence can hold. When Thomas Edison's lab burned down, destroying years of work, he didn't spiral into despair. His anchor: "There's value in disaster. All our mistakes are burned up. Thank God we can start anew." Within weeks, he'd rebuilt. Modern psychology validates this. Studies on implementation intentions show that pre-programmed responses, "When X happens, I'll remember why," reduce decision fatigue during crises. The Stoics were early architects of this mental circuitry. Your challenge isn't to adopt someone else's anchor, but to forge your own. Start by identifying a recurring struggle, maybe road rage, performance anxiety, or the dread of Monday mornings. Then mine your life for phrases that resonate. It could be a line from a song that once steadied you: "I will survive," a grandparent's advice, "Never wrestle with pigs," or even a stark truth: "Discomfort is the price of growth." The key is to stress test it. Next time your pulse spikes at a rude comment, does "they're fighting invisible battles" soften the sting? When procrastination whispers, does "motion before motivation" get you moving? The most effective anchors often come with tactile triggers. A firefighter might touch her helmet strap while repeating, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast," before entering a burning building. A public speaker could press thumb and forefinger together while thinking, "Serve the audience," to shift focus from nerves to purpose. These rituals create neural shortcuts. By pairing a physical gesture with a mental reset, the body learns to trigger calm on command. The Stoics would have approved. Epictetus taught his students to associate specific hand positions with philosophical principles, turning abstract ideas into embodied reflexes. Tonight, as you reflect on the week's tensions, listen for the phrase that surfaces unbidden, the one your mind already reaches for when things get hard. Then give it permission to evolve. Maybe "breathe" becomes "breathe, then proceed," or "I can't handle this" flips to "I've handled harder," because an anchor isn't just a comfort, it's a compass. And in life's roughest seas, even the smallest compass can point the way home. Marcus Aurelius kept a private list of those who opposed him, not to nurse grudges, but to mine their critiques for hidden lessons. He wrote, "The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing, and nowhere is this truer than in how we engage with our rivals." Take the legendary tennis rivalry between Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. Early in their careers, Federer struggled against Nadal's relentless topspin and left-handed angles. Instead of resenting this obstacle, Federer dissected it. He adjusted his backhand, improved his footwork on clay courts, and even studied Nadal's mental resilience. Years later, he'd credit his rival for making him a more complete player. "Rafa forced me to evolve," he admitted. The very qualities that made Nadal a tormentor also made him an unwitting coach. Critics and competitors hold up a mirror, one that often reflects our blind spots. That colleague who nitpicks your reports, they might reveal your tendency to prioritize speed over precision. The friend who challenges your opinions. They're testing the depth of your convictions. Even online trolls beneath their vitriol can expose areas where your arguments lack clarity. The Stoic approach isn't to dismiss these challenges as nuisances, but to ask, what if this person is the sandpaper roughing away my edges? When the Roman senator Cato was mocked for his rigid principles, he didn't soften his stance, he doubled down, proving that consistency could become its own form of charisma. Consider a modern workplace feud. Two sales managers compete for promotions, their rivalry simmering through quarterly meetings. One views the other as a threat, the other starts cataloging their rival's tactics. The way they tailor pitches to clients, their knack for turning objections into opportunities. Over time, the rivalry becomes a mentorship in disguise. This is the enemy's gift, friction that polishes rather than erodes. The Stoics called this sympatheia, the interdependence of all things, where even opposition serves a purpose. Your turn, reflect on someone who's pushed your buttons recently. Not the harmless annoyances, but the person who truly gets under your skin. What muscle have they made you flex? That neighbor who debates politics aggressively, they're training you in patience or sharpening your reasoning. The sibling who outperforms you in your parents' eyes. They're revealing where you've tied self-worth to external validation. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Not by rejecting their influence, but by transmuting it into growth. The final test, gratitude, not the hollow kind, thank you for being terrible, but the recognition that steel isn't tempered without fire. When journalist Malcolm X faced racial hatred in prison, he used his enemies' vitriol as fuel to educate himself, later calling prison his alma mater. That's the ultimate alchemy, taking the poison they hand you and turning it into medicine. So tonight, write down one thing a rival or critic has inadvertently taught you. Not to flatter them, but to free yourself, because the moment you stop seeing antagonists as obstacles and start treating them as sparring partners, every conflict becomes a classroom. Epictetus stood in his humble Athenian classroom, surrounded by students who would one day carry Stoicism to the farthest corners of the Roman Empire. He didn't see himself merely as a teacher of philosophy, he was a living exhibit of its principles. You are not here to learn what books say, he told them, but how to live in a way that becomes a book others might read. This was the birth of Stoic role ethics, the idea that every choice you make isn't just for yourself, but for the invisible audience of those who will inherit your example. Your children observing how you handle stress, your co-workers noting how you face failure, even strangers glimpsing your integrity in small moments, they're all students in the unwritten curriculum of your life. Consider the ripple effect of a single act of resilience. When Frederick Douglass, the enslaved man who became America's most powerful abolitionist, taught himself to read by bartering bread for lessons from poor white children, he wasn't just gaining knowledge, he was scripting a manual for future generations on how to turn desperation into determination. Centuries earlier, the Stoic philosopher Cleans hauled water by night to fund his studies, showing his students that no labor dishonors those who work with purpose. These weren't isolated acts of survival, they were lived lectures on dignity. Your struggles today, whether it's waking early to exercise despite exhaustion or maintaining calm during a layoff, are equally potent demonstrations for someone watching. This legacy isn't about performative perfection. It's the raw, unvarnished humanity of how you rise after falling that etches the deepest marks. Think of a parent apologizing to their child after losing their temper. That moment models accountability more powerfully than any lecture on virtue. Or a leader admitting, "I don't know, but I'll find out," transforming uncertainty into a masterclass in intellectual humility. The Stoics called this prosaic mindfulness that your every action sets precedent. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire while mourning 8 lost children, wrote his private meditations not for publication, but as rehearsal for showing his citizens how to grieve with grace. Now turn the lens inward. What lessons are embedded in your recent challenges? That week you powered through flu symptoms to meet a deadline. What did that teach your team about commitment? The time you walked away from a toxic argument instead of escalating, what silent syllabus on conflict resolution did that add to your relationships? Legacy isn't built in grand gestures alone. It's woven through the ordinary fabric of how you endure traffic jams, medical scares, or dashed expectations. As Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "Men learn while they teach." Your struggles become others' survival guides precisely because they're unpolished and real. The ultimate question isn't whether you're leaving a legacy. You always are. It's whether you're conscious of the curriculum. Tonight, try this exercise. List 3 hard moments from this month. Next to each, write who might have been watching: your nervous employee, your impressionable niece, your younger self. Then answer, what unintentional lesson might they have taken? A missed workout could signal goals don't matter or rest is sacred, depending on how you frame it. A career setback might whisper give up or pivot based on your response. This isn't about self-judgment, it's about recognizing that resilience is contagious. Epictetus, who began life as a disabled slave, knew that philosophy's highest purpose wasn't personal tranquility alone, but becoming a walking city, a living polis where others could take refuge. Your life, with all its stumbles and comebacks, is already someone else's textbook. The only choice is whether to leave the pages blank or fill them with ink worth reading. So ask not just what am I overcoming, but who's learning from how I overcome? Because the mightiest legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what keeps walking forward in those you've strengthened by example. Imagine starting your day not with a frantic scroll through notifications, but with 5 minutes spent reading a single Stoic quote, maybe Marcus Aurelius, reminding you, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Or ending your commute not by stewing in traffic, but by practicing premeditatio malorum, mentally rehearsing how you'd handle your biggest fear with calm clarity. These aren't grand gestures requiring hours of effort, they're micro-practices, the Stoic equivalent of brushing your teeth for the soul. Small, consistent doses of wisdom that compound over time into unshakable resilience. Take the ancient practice of morning and evening reflections, rituals so simple they fit between brewing coffee and tying your shoes. The Stoics didn't carve out hours for these, they wove them into life's margins. Seneca would review his day in the bath, asking, "What ailment did I cure today?" While modern equivalents might be a sticky note on your bathroom mirror. "What's one virtue I'll embody today?" The magic isn't in the duration, it's in the daily repetition. Like a gardener watering seedlings, you're nurturing mental habits drop by drop. Here's the twist: micro-practices work precisely because they're not overwhelming. Research on habit formation shows that tiny actions, flossing one tooth, doing 2 push-ups, are far more sustainable than ambitious goals. The Stoics anticipated this by designing philosophy for real lives. Epictetus, teaching students who were soldiers and merchants, knew they couldn't meditate for hours, so he prescribed prosaic, moments of mindfulness while walking or eating. Your version, pausing before a meal to silently acknowledge life's impermanence, or using a red traffic light as a cue to check your posture and breathe deeply. Consider the power of quote cards not as decorative platitudes but as tactical tools. Keep one in your wallet where your credit card used to be, so every time you reach to spend, you see Epictetus. Wealth is not having many possessions but few wants. Or tape another to your laptop with Seneca's, "Life is long if you know how to use it." These aren't passive inspirations, they're interrupters of autopilot, jolting you back to intention. Historical figures from Admiral Stockdale to Frederick Douglass carried Stoic maxims into battle and oppression, their micro-doses of wisdom in the grind of survival. Now the experiment: pick one micro-practice to trial for just 3 days. It could be as simple as setting a phone alarm labeled Memento Mori at 3 p.m., prompting you to pause and ask, "Am I using this day or is it using me?" Or perhaps the 5-minute obstacle reframe, journaling one challenge each evening and brainstorming how it might secretly serve you. The key is consistency, not complexity. Like Musonius Rufus teaching philosophy while digging gardens, you're planting wisdom in the soil of ordinary moments. What makes these practices stick is their seamlessness. The shower becomes a meditation chamber when you use the first 30 seconds to visualize your ideal response to stress. The walk from your car to the office transforms into a meditatio on what's within your control. Even social media scrolling can be hacked. Follow an account like @Daily Stoic, letting each post be a mini lesson amidst the noise. The ancient Stoics didn't have apps, but they'd have loved the idea of philosophy delivered in bite-sized alerts. Your challenge isn't to overhaul your life, it's to infiltrate it with micro moments of Stoic clarity. Because transformation doesn't happen in grand declarations, it happens in the quiet accumulation of small, daily choices. So tonight, as you charge your phone, ask yourself, what's one Stoic practice that could recharge my mind in the time it takes my battery to hit 100%? The answer might just be the seed of your next breakthrough. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who was once a slave, delivered one of history's most liberating truths with just 9 words: "No one can harm you unless you let them." At first glance, it sounds impossibly defiant. How could a prisoner in chains, a bullied student, or a betrayed partner claim immunity from harm? But Epictetus wasn't talking about physical pain or external circumstances. He was revealing the inviolable sanctuary of your mind. Picture a medieval castle with towering walls. The outer courtyards might be overrun by invaders, but the inner keep remains impregnable. That's your will. No insult, betrayal, or failure can breach it without your consent. The modern equivalent, that toxic co-worker's barb, only stings if you internalize it as truth. The ex's rejection only devastates if you let it redefine your worth. Even injustice, while undeniable in its impact, cannot corrupt your inner citadel unless you hand it the keys. This isn't theoretical, it's a survival tool forged in real oppression. Admiral James Stockdale, shot down over Vietnam and held as a POW for 7 years, applied Epictetus' maxim to withstand torture. His captors could break his body, but they couldn't force him to betray his fellow prisoners or abandon his principles. Stockdale later explained, "They had control over the light switch, but I had control over my mind." Fast forward to today, when a social media mob tries to shame someone for an unpopular opinion, the difference between devastation and defiance lies in that same inner fortress. The words "no one can harm you" aren't a denial of suffering, they're a declaration of sovereignty over meaning. Modern psychology echoes this ancient insight. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, teaches that between stimulus and response lies a space where choice resides. That space is your Epictetan keep. When your boss belittles your idea in a meeting, the initial flush of humiliation is biological, but the story you tell yourself, "I'm incompetent vs. their criticism might hold a kernel of truth, determines whether the harm sticks. The Stoics called this the discipline of Ascent, the practice of interrogating first impressions before letting them shape your reality. Imagine a bouncer at the door of your mind, checking each thought's credentials before granting entry. Does this belief serve my growth? Is this interpretation factual or fictional? Boundaries are the architectural blueprints for that inner stronghold. Saying no to a friend who chronically cancels plans isn't harsh, it's a moat protecting your self-respect. Turning off notifications during family time isn't antisocial, it's a drawbridge raised against digital intrusions. Even something as simple as pausing before reacting to a provocation, "I'll respond tomorrow when emotions cool," is a sentry guarding your peace. The unbreakable will isn't about rigidity, it's about discerning what deserves your energy and what merits only indifference. So where will you assert this unshakable sovereignty this week? Maybe it's finally setting that overdue boundary with a draining relative. "I love you, but I won't discuss politics at dinner." Perhaps it's refusing to let traffic hijack your mood by treating red lights as breathing exercises. Or maybe it's the quietest revolution of all, looking in the mirror and rejecting the inner critic's narrative that you're not enough. Because the ultimate act of unbreakable will isn't defiance against others, it's loyalty to yourself. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The world will always have storms. But you get to choose whether they flood your foundations or water your roots." This is the Stoic promise. No force on earth can conquer a will that refuses to surrender. Not because life becomes painless, but because you become unshakable, not a leaf blown by every wind, but a tree that bends without breaking, knowing storms are just seasons passing through. So plant your feet, guard your gates, and remember, the only power anyone truly holds over you is the power you grant them. That's not philosophy, that's freedom. Imagine standing at the base of a mountain, gazing up at its towering peak. The climb seems impossible until you take the first step, then the next and the next. That's the essence of these 48 Stoic practices. Not a single heroic leap, but the quiet, relentless accumulation of steps that forge unshakable resilience. Each cold shower, each moment of paused reflection, every time you choose principle over impulse, these are the stones that build your inner fortress. The Stoics weren't promising a life without storms. They were handing you the tools to stand steady within them. And here's the secret: you don't need to master all 48 at once. Start with one, just one. Like a single ember that ignites a fire, your smallest consistent action will ripple outward, transforming not just how you face challenges, but who you become in the process. This isn't about locking away your emotions or white-knuckling through life. Stoicism, at its core, is the art of turning obstacles into fuel. When you practice negative visualization, you're not dwelling on doom, you're vaccinating your mind against fear. When you journal at night, you're not just recounting events, you're refining your moral compass. Even the discipline of voluntary discomfort isn't self-punishment, it's the ultimate act of self-ownership, proving to yourself that comfort is a choice, not a crutch. The Roman gladiators trained with weighted swords so their real weapons would feel light. These practices, they're your weighted swords. Seneca, who faced exile, betrayal, and Nero's tyranny, left us this rallying cry: difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Think of the last time you faced something hard, maybe a grueling project, a personal loss, or even just dragging yourself out of bed on a bleak morning. You survived it. Now imagine meeting every challenge with that same tenacity, armed with these practices. That's the Stoic promise, not a life without pain, but a life where pain becomes your teacher. So here's your invitation. Don't try to swallow the whole feast at once. Pick one practice, just one, that resonates with you this very moment. Maybe it's the morning reflection where you set your intentions before the world crashes in. Or perhaps it's the view from above, zooming out when stress feels suffocating. Commit to it for 7 days. Notice how it shifts your posture toward life's turbulence. Then come back here, tell us in the comments what changed. Did the traffic jam that once ruined your morning become a chance to practice patience? Did the criticism that used to sting now reveal a hidden edge to polish? Your story might be the spark someone else needs to begin their own climb. Thank you for walking this path with me. If these lessons have lit even a small fire in you, consider subscribing. We're just scratching the surface of Stoic wisdom, and there's so much more terrain to explore together. Remember, the mountain doesn't judge how slowly you climb, only that you keep ascending. And with each step, you're not just moving upward, you're becoming the kind of person who can't be knocked down. Now go.